We now call this meeting to order. If you could please rise if you are able and pay attention to Councilwoman Ortiz for the invocation, to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This evening I'm going to do something different since my voice is a little scratchy there. I'd like for us to, in our own way, take a moment of silence for our loved ones that have gone on. The mayor has lost her grandmother, to keep her and her family in continuous prayer. And also the victim, excuse me, of the Washburn, Mr. Simmons and his family. There's just a lot of hurt and a lot of pain around our city. So if we can just take a few moments of silence and to continuously keep them in our prayers, that'd be much appreciated this evening. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Back to the awkward walk. So we have a few celebrations tonight. The first one is, if please, Colonel Franz could please join us, and if he would like his family to join him as well, they could come, and please, Colonel Skoda, if you could please join us as well. For those of you who are not aware of our military family, we had a huge event happen this weekend in the city of Topeka. The 190th wing had been led by Colonel Franz for over 4 years, and he just retired this Sunday. And the leadership has been passed on to now Commander Skoda. I hope I'm saying your ranks. I got it? Okay. The city of Topeka is extremely proud of the military family that we have in our community. We understand that the selfless sacrifice that they do for our country is done not only on the backs of their lives, but the backs of their families that are supporting them, which is why I asked Colonel to come over and bring his family as well. His beautiful mother is in the audience, and she has decided that she's going to watch. So on behalf of the city of Topeka, I want to say thank you so much for your service. Thank you to your family for being with you through so many challenges, and for just helping lead our community, and for the efforts that you have tried to bring forth to our community. Many people don't know this. We in our community are trying to advocate strongly for an additional simulator in our community. And it's one thing to see our men and women in uniform talk and be out in our community, but it's another to be in a room full of a whole bunch of leaders in the military realm and watch your people stand up and represent your community so well. And we had Matt Pavarnik, we have Curtis, we have a huge group of people that are working with our military team, just so that you know that our communities are working together very closely. So it is my honor to give you the City's Challenge coin. And yes. And if you could hold this for me, you have the first unofficial, because we're voting on it still, flag of the city of Topeka.
Wow. Neat. Well, thank you for having us out tonight. We are just grateful for a community that would invite us from the wing to come out and see you tonight to honor Colonel Franz this way. We're grateful for the partnership that we have with the community. We're down there every day just doing our mission and working hard at supporting our primary mission of being ready and capable to provide worldwide aerial refueling anywhere, anytime on the planet. We do that every day, and we're happy doing that. We don't need the recognition. So, but we're very appreciative when you bring us up for something like this. And it's a very appropriate person to stand up in front of you and honor this guy right here, Colonel Franz. We call him J-Rod. He is a true son of the city, born and raised right here. He served the wing and the Kansas Air National Guard for over 30 years. I was a high school kid that just took a chance on an unknown and enlisted right out of high school and became a crew chief, traveled the world, was sent overseas to participate in Operation Desert Shield, and has been acting in some capacity all the way through senior leadership and wing commander through every operation that our nation has been involved in up until now. So it's a great thing that you would honor him, and we're grateful for you bringing us out. Thank you.
City Manager.
Well, from one veteran to another, I want to present you. We don't have medals, but we do have our little city pen that we wear as recognition, which has our shield. And so we want to pass one of those on to you. Thank you very much. No, you won't wear it long on your uniform. I don't think I'll be wearing the uniform. Thank you. So there you go. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
One more.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So my name's Curtis Sneed, and I'm with the Greater Topeka Partnership. I'm staff liaison to a group called the Military Relations Council. The council was developed to try to raise the level of mutual awareness and appreciation between our civilian sectors and our military installations here in town. And I can tell you that Colonel Franz and his team have been invaluable members of that council since its inception. It has been a genuine pleasure getting to know the Colonel and his team. And as the mayor pointed out, it has also been quite a thrill to be able to stand beside our friends at the 190th, who are a very important part of our community and our economy, as we've told the story of Topeka to officials all throughout levels of the military, clear up to the Pentagon. So it has been a great pleasure to work with you and to get to know you. And I will tell you that the Greater Topeka Partnership would like to give you a small token of our appreciation for your support. Given the gift rules that you operate under, it does have to be a small token. So thank you for that. The Military Relations Council also has a challenge coin that we have developed. It has the Capitol Dome pictured on one side, and on the other side it says, "Thank you for your sacrifice." So, Colonel, thank you.
Curtis, thank you for your energy and enthusiasm.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Would you like to say a few words to your community?
I would. I would just like to say thank you for all the support from the city of Topeka for the 190th. When I think about the military, the 190th truly is the hometown team here in Topeka. And the energy and enthusiasm from Curtis Sneed and Matt Pivarnik over the last several years with the Military Relations Council and raising awareness of what we do in the community has been wonderful. And the relationships that we're forming now with the mayor, and where Colonel Skoda and her plan to take that in the future. They have some initiatives that we'll probably release to the public here down the road. But I am very excited about the direction and the bond that we're building with the community, and it's only going to continue to get better. But thank you all very much for your support. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right.
And we continue the party with another proclamation. If our friends from Letter Carrier Stamp Out Hunger Food Stamp Food Drive Day could join us. Oh, we have props. It's awesome. So it is my honor today to present this proclamation that states that whereas every year on the second Saturday in May, for the past 27 years, letter carriers across the country collect non-perishable food as part of the nation's largest one-day food drive, distributing the donations to local food banks. And whereas we recognize our letter carriers for their hard work and their commitment to our city of Topeka, the letter carriers serve our city in such a gracious way through the harshest of weather, be it extreme heat and a summer day, ice or snow. Whereas the need for food assistance remains an important issue in our city, state, and nation, it is our duty as citizens to bring awareness to the ongoing problem of hunger and contribute to the importance caused by making sure that non-perishable food items in our mailbox are in our mailbox to support the food drive. Therefore, I, Mayor Michelle de la Isla of Topeka, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the Letter Carrier Stamp Out Hunger's Food Drive Day as May 11, 2019. Could you guys say a few words about the event? Who wants to take this?
They nominate me.
Awesome.
We are just so thankful for the community support for the food drive. This is a nationwide drive that we do here locally in Topeka. It's a partnership between the letter carriers, the United Way, and harvesters, and it has been a very beneficial partnership all the way around. Last year, as you can see on our can, in one day, we raised 50,000 pounds of food, which provided over 42,000 meals. 1 in 7 people in our community is hungry, and we have kiddos who are getting out of school and are going to go home, and this drive helps us to fill up those pantry shelves right before that summer hunger hits. And so it's a critical drive for us. Sometimes our friends and our neighbors don't want to put cans out and burden their letter carriers, but our letter carriers really want the food. So our goal every year is to increase the amount of food that we're able to collect on that day, and we're only able to do it because of these amazing people and then all of you in our community. So we appreciate your recognition and support. And anything else, guys?
We take cash too.
We take cash too. Yep. You can put a check, put a stamp on it, stick it in that mailbox. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Here's your proclamation. And last but not least, Councilwoman Hiller, would you like to join us? This is bike proclamation. I saw Carl Fundenberger around here. Doño, you ride the bicycle. So this is a proclamation to celebrate May 2019 as Bike Month. It states that whereas today millions of Americans engage in bicycling as a sustainable form of transportation and an excellent form for fitness and for quality family recreation time, and whereas the City of Topeka Metropolitan Planning Organization, that's a mouthful, and Complete Streets Advisory Committee promote a greater public awareness of bicycle operation safety and education, whereas the MTPO will update Topeka's master plan this year to achieve a future of low-stress, high-use network, having already completed a total of 61.3 miles of on-street bikeways with an additional 10.44 coming in 2019. Now, therefore, I, Michelle de la Isla, Mayor of the City of Topeka, do hereby proclaim May 2019 as Bike Month, May 13th through the 17th as Bike to Work Week, and May 13th as Ride with the County Commissioner. You're not riding with me this year? So, anybody want to say a few words about this?
Thank you, Mayor. It's always nice to get this recognition during National Bicycle Week. And I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize some of our collaborating partners. It's not just us city folks, it's City and County Public Works, Shawnee County Health Department, Topeka Transit, ADA. We have various bicycle clubs represented on our Complete Streets Advisory Committee, as well as Councilwoman Hiller, who's got this started for us a long time ago. And just want to encourage everybody to get out and ride bikes this month and experience some of our new infrastructure that we got put in place. Getting a lot of good grants and building more infrastructure and good exercise. So thank you all. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller, would you like to say a few words?
Wasn't expecting it, but I'll mention that what has come from the bikes development and the system development is Topeka being really on the cutting edge in the whole country of adopting what they call a complete streets, not only a policy, but design standards. And the staff throughout all the departments, planning, public works, engineering, and so on, has also owned that those concepts. They're coming into the book now instead of just being ideas. And last night at Topeka Bible Church, there were over 80 citizens plus staff and consultants giving some input on how to develop the 12th and Huntoon corridor. That's pretty incredible. People are really participating still to make it happen and make it happen well. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. We now proceed with the roll call.
Mayor De La Isla.
Here.
Council members Hiller.
Here.
Clear.
Here.
Ortiz.
Here.
Emerson.
Here.
Padilla.
Here.
Jensen.
Present.
Mays.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Lesser.
Here.
We now move on to the consent agenda, if the clerk would read.
Presentations.
Oh, we now proceed to the first presentation, if the clerk would read.
First presentation is for the Topeka Tourism Business Improvement District Annual Report, and Kurt Young with the advisory board is here to present.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Kurt Young's coming to the microphone from Executive Director from the Topeka Lodging. He will make his report. Kurt?
Okay, we're really excited. We've just completed our first year with the Tourism Business Improvement District, so we have 1 year of revenue behind us, and we're excited that we've had this opportunity to participate in the design and construction portion of the plaza. You should have in your packet that you received earlier just the cover sheet that I attached to it, and then the actual spreadsheet that gives the actual numbers, revenue numbers that were collected during 2018 and where they were spent. And the first column shows the budget report that was the budget numbers that were budgeted for the expenditure of the 2018 money, and then it shows the actuals and translates to an actual percent spent. We have, in 2018, all of the money that was earmarked for, let me restate that. Most of the money was earmarked to pay for architectural fees for the design portion of the downtown plaza. We modified that just a little bit going forward to where that same amount of money goes directly to the foundation to be used to pay off the remaining balance of the architectural fees. Once that's done, it will roll over and become part of the operational funding for the plaza. So we're optimistic that as the excitement builds and interest in the plaza continues to grow, believe it or not, we're already getting phone calls from people wanting to use the plaza and present on the plaza. So it's exciting, and we're glad to be part of it. The third page of the document that you have is the actual proposed budget and allocation report for 2020, which by statute has to be presented to you by May the 15th. So that's the two documents that are there. There really isn't anything other to elaborate on, but I will take questions if you have any.
Any questions for Mr. Young?
Is anybody else as excited as I am about this?
Councilwoman Hiller.
Ready to get the meeting moved.
That's where I was going. Not a question at all, but for people who don't know, I mean, this has been a labor of love for the private sector as well as the partnership with the city. And Kurt, your leadership and your experience have been invaluable to the whole thing. I know you put together a great team, or they got you, whichever happened. But it's really impressive to see how it's worked. So
we're just glad to be part of it.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you for your superb job, Mr. Young. We appreciate you. We have another presentation, if the clerk would read.
The second presentation is on the community outreach vehicle, and Sergeant Josh Clem with PD is here to present. Molly.
City Manager.
Sergeant Josh Clam will be providing this presentation. And Chief Cochran, I think, has some comments as well.
Thank you all. I'm just here to talk about a new initiative that we are undertaking that we are calling the Community Outreach Team. within our city, we've identified some issues, and one of those is unnecessary emergency calls being made through the 911 services, and the 911 services, whether that's TPD, AMR, fire, or responding. Majority of these are medical calls that we are currently experiencing, and so some of the issues that we are running into is every single medical call that goes through the 911 system, fire automatically responds, and AMR is going to respond. On occasion, TPD will respond, kind of depending on the circumstances. And so when we start responding, well, let me back up. Here's an example of an individual that is kind of abusing the system, if you will. We had an individual who did have some mental health issues, but really had some addiction issues. And what he was doing is he would get intoxicated, and then he would call fire and AMR, and he would use the excuse that he's having chest pains because he knew that would get him a trip to the hospital no matter what. All he was looking for was a chemical detox. And once he got to the hospital, he would tell them whatever he needed to. He'd get his chemical detox. He'd go back home, and then he would repeat the process 2 or 3 times because after the chemical detox, he could get intoxicated much faster and much cheaper. And so he would do this over and over and over, not only multiple days, but like multiple days within a week. So again, just abuse of the system. And so every time fire and AMR are responding to medical calls, especially these non-emergency calls, really non-emergency calls, they're putting unnecessary wear and tear on their vehicles. Same with TPD when we respond. We are putting the general public at some undue risk when we are responding lights and sirens to what we believe is a medical emergency, and really it's not. Like in that case, it's an individual who just wanted to get a cheaper drunk. And so, again, putting the public on undue risk. And then when we get to the hospital, it really hurts the entire community because when we are filling up a hospital ER room bed with a non-medical emergency, the wait times are longer. We're accruing hospital bills that aren't getting paid, things of that nature. So what we kind of did is we got together, actually well over a year ago, started discussing this issue. And so TPD already has an established crisis intervention team or CIT teams. So what we'd like to do with the partnership with fire is we're going to add a paramedic to this team when we do the community outreach teams. And then on top of that, so we'll have a paramedic, we'll have a mental health professional, and then a CIT trained officer, and then we'll use our new community outreach vehicle. And this is just an example. This isn't exactly what it looks like, but the department acquired an ambulance, an old ambulance. We're removing a lot of the emergency medical stuff out of it. And this is an example with the wrap that it can look like, both on the side and on the back. And so when we have our team established, what we're going to do is both TPD, Topeka Fire, and especially Stormont-Vail Hospital, we have a list what we refer to as ultra-high utilizers, individuals who are calling emergency services all of the time, 3, 5, 10, 20 times a day, or multiple times within a month. Who are these individuals and why are they calling? And what we're going to do is we'll start cross-referencing that list. I know the last time TPD and Fire looked at our high utilizer list, over 50% of the list overlapped, and they had, most of those people had a mental health issue that they were living with. And so we're going to start looking at those lists. We're going to basically compile down on all 3. Who's the main people that are using up all these services, and that is honestly who we're gonna focus on. How can we get them to quit calling 911 and utilizing these services? So once we have that list established, the outreach teams are going to respond out to these individuals' houses and basically do house calls, if you will, or just cold calls, and go out and see how they're doing. This will be kind of a holistic approach. So we'll have CIT for the mental health aspect, and then we'll have paramedics there that can do some overall, just real basic examinations, if you will, to see if there's any actual medical issues going on. If there is an actual medical emergency, we'll actually refer to AMR, and we'll call them to transport them to the hospital. This vehicle is not an emergency vehicle. It's an old ambulance, but like I said, we've removed a lot of that out of it. It's not intended to be an emergency vehicle. It's just a giant workspace that we can have a controlled environment where we can talk with individuals in the back where there's air conditioning or heating, depending on the weather, things like that. And it'll be big enough and a lot of storage that we can house different items on it. We've already had some success with this as far as the collaboration between all the different emergency services. We had an individual in Oakland who, again, in this case, he was had some addiction issues. He was a chronic alcoholic. He was calling Topeka Fire multiple times a day, every single day because he would get so intoxicated, he would just kind of slide out of his lazy boy recliner. But then he was so intoxicated he couldn't get off the floor. And so he would call fire to basically come pick him up, put him back in his chair, and then once he was there and fire would leave, he would continue to drink. And this progressed to the point actually to organ failure. One of the last medical call we had on him, he was literally green. And so it took fire, CIT, and AMR all working together to finally get him to a hospital. And then once we did, we were able to get him into a home, so it's a little bit more control, but we honestly were able to save his life just kind of working together and working through that issue. And that's what we'd like to see a little bit more of with this new team. Some projected stats. So it's, again, these are estimated numbers. So every time an individual calls 911 for a medical and fire and AMR and everybody responds out, it's around $500 per call. And then if they get transported to the hospital, you're talking around $1,500. So overall, each medical, you're looking at around, if not over $2,000. And so, again, for all these non-emergencies, that we're just accruing a lot of costs. And again, that's not taking into account all the wear and tear on the vehicles, things of that. So some of our projected outcomes, what we'd like to do, especially within this first year, is reduce that ultra-high utilizer list by 25%. And then we're starting to use Claim Track. Topeka Fire and TPD are getting involved in Claim Track, so we can start tracking these individuals a little bit better. So hopefully in a year, we'll be able to tell you exactly how many ultra-high utilizers we're using with this program, how much money we're honestly saving the city and the taxpayers by diverting them to services rather than them calling 911 and going to the hospital as much as they want. On top of that, we are also going to use this vehicle for some homeless outreach. We've been working with the city council on different homeless outreach ideas and programs. This is just another one we're going to add to it. And so the vehicle has a lot of storage. So we'll be able to store water, or in the winter months, we have store cold gear, things of that nature. And then again, we can use this vehicle instead of taking individuals to the hospital. This last winter, actually just right outside underneath the bridge here, I had an individual who was extremely cold. He wasn't frostbit yet, but it was about 3 degrees out when I was talking to him. He was just really, really, really cold. Well, I ended up taking him to the hospital because I didn't have any other options, and he took up a bed for about 3 or 4 hours. Well, with this vehicle, with the heat on the back, we can have some warm liquids, things like that. We can get his body temperature up instead of using an emergency room, things like that. So it's just another thing we're going to use this vehicle for. Some of the community partners that come together with this, as you see, it's Topeka Fire, Topeka Police, Stormontville Hospital, Vallejo Behavioral Health. They're providing the mental health professionals, the Topeka Rescue Mission, again with the homeless outreach, Kansas Gas, and Citizens Ambassadors, the Citizens Academy Ambassadors. So with that, I'd be more than happy to stand for any questions anybody might have. Yes, ma'am.
So I think this question, Sergeant Clam, I don't know if you can answer it or Chief can answer it, but I would love to hear a little bit about the city, the police and the fire department coming together to do this. Could you just talk to us a little about, because it's pretty cool that these departments are working together.
You've been working with them, I think you go ahead.
Both Chief Duke and Chief Cochran have actually, they kind of started this, like I said, well over a year ago. And then what we've done is we've kind of just been brainstorming different ways that we as two entities can, again, work on this vulnerable population, just trying to get them to cut down on 911 and cut down all these medical calls. And so, it's just been like I say, kind of working through policies and things like that, figuring out how we can do this. And I think we've come up with pretty good solutions. So I'm pretty excited to get started. I'm hoping we can actually get started around in about a month or so. Our vehicle should get its wrap. It's getting that brand new wrap done, hopefully by the end of this week, and we'll have to do a little bit of remodeling on the interior, and then we should be good to go. So hopefully here, like I said, within a month, you'll see it rolling around the city.
Additional questions? Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Sergeant Clam. You're my man, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep, he is. Get used to him. Councilman Mays, he's going to be coming to our public health and safety meetings and blow your mind. But having said all that, I think this is great, and what I hear I like. I just have one issue sitting here. If we have a gentleman that has fallen out of his chair, that is drunk, several times, like 5, we need to be calling Adult Protection Service. We need to make sure that we intertwine with the state, because there's an issue here.
Absolutely.
And we can take care of that issue. And I just want to make sure that we are keeping that in the back of our mind. I've seen 2 homeless people. One, his toes froze to death and he fell out and we were looking for him. So I just think we need to maybe pull somebody in from the state, but that just doesn't, it sounds like sometimes when we don't have a cure, we need to get them a guardian or a conservator, or we need to report that because it's kind of out of our control. Other than everything else, I like it. I hope you'll invite me and Antonio when you take us on that ride. We'd like to do that, wouldn't we, Antonio?
Councilman Emerson, to be followed by Deputy Mayor Claire.
Absolutely, Ms. Ortiz. Sergeant Clam, I just wanted to say thank you. This is a fantastic solution, it looks to me like. And with apologies to anybody in the room here that works in government, especially when I've seen stuff at the federal level, they're usually the way government fixes a problem is we go buy some $3 or $4 million piece of equipment and hire new staff. I love it that you guys did what a business would do. You guys went and found something, an asset that was already there used. You're fixing it up. I love what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Claire.
How many individuals do you think is on the list?
I can think of 5 right now off the top of my head, so probably 10 to 15 once we look at all, both fire, TPD, and Stormont Vale. That's where the majority of them go as far as with mental health. So I would guess 10 to 15, maybe up to 20.
And how many calls a week do you think those 20 average?
Oh, man, average.
We got one on the books right now in the last 60 days, 19 times.
Oh my God.
So if you have 20 times 20, that's a lot. Okay, thank you.
Additional questions or comments? Oh, Councilwoman Heller.
Thank you. The last time I sat with you all, what we were talking about, is there, and police and fire were together, is there any chance that there'd be room for hoarders on your list?
Well, I mean, I would never say no. Hoarding is definitely, and I'm not a mental health professional, I just work with them, but that's definitely a mental health aspect that, I mean, we potentially could work into. I mean, there's always room for expansion.
I think it's a great idea. It's a different addiction or a different problem, but we know that we've lost people to fires because of that. And code there and police and fire all get involved in those, and it's just sad, and some could be prevented.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a hard job, but appreciate all that you're doing because it's important.
Deputy Mayor Claire.
Can you give me an idea now, if someone calls and there's this issue, who goes out? What's going to happen?
So majority of the time it'll just be fire and AMR. Now once they've established that there's a pattern, they are starting to request CIT more and more. And so either police will get asked to come out or specifically CIT will. So talking about like adult protective services, getting them involved. My CIT team will do a lot of those reports compared to patrolmen. They can, but my team does them a lot more frequently. So right now, just those 2 entities, AMR and fire, until we start getting requested or again we see a pattern, and then my team, the CIT team, will usually start responding as well.
As well. So are we, if fire is going out every time, how are we saving by doing this?
So ultimately the goal will be like that individual who is calling to go get the chemical detox. Ultimately the goal will be to get them into services, whether that's counseling services, addiction services, or maybe they need a guardian or a place in some type of mental health nursing home, something along those lines. Get them into a more structured environment to where they're, like for his case, he's not getting drunk 3, 4, 5 times a day, calling 911. Ideally, the outcome will be that we can get them into a much better place where they're just not utilizing 911 at all, so they're not calling those medicals in.
And so then you get that down by 25%.
That's the goal.
And then save the, okay.
If I'm Mayor, City Manager, and Council, this won't be an immediate response vehicle. This is a vehicle that will supplement. So we have that high utilizer list, and there'll be like, currently there's about 150 people that are high utilizers between police, fire, and mental health services. And so what they'll do is we'll prioritize that list, and then this team will roll out once a week and try to make its contact on a proactive basis to encounter those people to try to reduce those 911 calls. and then it'll also be used to outreach homeless camps and stuff like that. So, and Councilman Emerson, you mentioned costs and stuff, or you alluded to that. What I can tell you, this program's costing the city of Topeka nothing more than the cost of our personnel and the cost of the fire department's personnel. This is a partnership that we entered into with Vallejo and with Stormontville Foundation and Kansas Gas Service Foundation. Those two are the funders of this program. So it's not costing the city of Topeka anything other than the salaries for our officers in the fire department to man that. And so this is one of those partnerships that you talked about that saves the city money, actually. And so it's a great partnership, and we're really excited about that.
Councilman Padilla.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Sergeant. I echo the comments. I think it's really commendable that you have looked at this problem, which has been long-standing, and taken a different perspective so that you can actually be proactive rather than reactive to the issue that typically we see in law enforcement or in medical services, and including the fire department. I think that's the best way them to also serve the public in another way other than putting out the fires. We know that they have a lot of trained staff, so we can utilize their expertise as well. Would it be fair to say that this might be, if not a cutting edge, a new idea that Topeka can be crowing about a little bit? Because I think more often than not, Topeka puts things into place that are ahead of the game that other people don't see, that we're really making progress in how we serve the community.
Yeah, it's very cutting edge. It falls on the lines of when we talked about the pedestrian ordinance and the public safety ordinances and stuff like that, and camping ordinances. There's a lot of things you have to have in place in order to make those things work. And this is another part of that, you know, the homeless outreach team, the HOT team, it all falls into that. So yeah, this is cutting edge. One of the best things about the internet is you can find out a whole lot of information. And so we did some research, and then we pulled things together. Chief Duke and I, we had a vision a year and a half ago or so, and we've worked on it, and we stayed with it, and we've morphed it into something that's going to work for the city of Topeka. It's going to be cost savings for the city of Topeka. And so, yeah, it is cutting edge, very cutting edge, and we're excited. You talked about endeavors with the fire department. We have another one going on medical response and the aspect of when our response team is activated and working with them. But the last collaboration that we got going is I'm on the CASA Board of Directors, and Chief Duke and I will be doing lip sync Friday at the Norseman. We're going to do Sonny and Cher. I'm Cher. And so we're very, very excited for that.
We need the hot vehicle there. The hot vehicle needs to be.
What he doesn't know is that he's in competition in that lip sync, and the mayor is going to be lip syncing as well. Any other questions with regards to this issue? All right, thank you so much, Sergeant Clam, for your presentation. We have a following presentation, if the city clerk would read.
The third presentation is a finance quarterly report from Director Jessica Lamondola.
Good evening. Probably not as exciting as the last presentation, but I'll try to follow them. So this is the first quarter report for the first 3 months of 2019. Revenues overall are up about 1.3%, with our general fund down 1.3%. Water fees up 6.5%, wastewater fees up 7.5%, and then stormwater fees up 8.2%. The utility funds are largely reflective of the increases that were approved by this team to help with the overall operations of the utilities. But I would like to draw your attention to sales tax. Even though at 4% versus a 12% below it doesn't seem as dramatic, sales tax is obviously a bigger revenue source for the city. So part of the reason I'm breaking sales tax out compared to other revenue sources is that it is about a third of our overall, at least in the general fund, and we're starting to get quite concerned with the performance. So Sales tax is down 4% in the 5 of the last 6 months, which is fairly dramatic. You know, part of us just learning about it and discussing it is this a bad weather year? Is this just preventing the, you know, the more severe weather activity? Did it just prevent us from going out, purchasing, making our normal day-to-day purchases? Or is it the beginning of a different cyclical trend? At this point, you know, obviously we don't know that. We're starting to have concerns that this is another cyclical trend. We spent a lot of time today going in, looking at the different vendors, the different market sectors, and, you know, there's not a shining star that says this is what's driving it, which is also leads me to believe that it might be cyclical. However, we've only had 2 checks that reflect 2019 itself. So hopefully over the next several months we continue to get data. So what this slide shows us is if you look at the bottom chart, we are down 4.3%. To receive, to get flat to budget, we would need the 3.3%, higher than 2018. Now 2018 was a good year. So there's a high likelihood that we're gonna have trouble meeting our current budget. So what are we doing for this, right? Well, I guess to start off with, we're not by ourselves. Many of our surrounding communities are seeing the same decline. The Lawrence Journal World article that came out last week indicated that Lawrence is experiencing it. Lenexa experienced significantly higher. They were close to 10%, although they'd probably like me to say 9%, which is what the article put in. I think Overland Park is seeing, I believe, around a 5% decline. So again, it doesn't seem to be necessarily us particular. However, with the size of our budget that it funds, we need to really think about how we're gonna respond. So what we will be considering over the next several months is a hiring freeze. And that would, you know, would look at targeting positions potentially or across the board. That's something we have to work out as we refine our projection. What we are currently doing is we implemented a 3-month hiring delay. So that is, you know, is building some savings. It's allowing departments or asking departments to, you know, focus on who we're hiring, really focus on need, and taking a little bit more time. And then another possible outcome, which I know the departments, none of them want to hear, but implementing a purchasing freeze. And at this point, again, we're not sure what that would look like, because it's really going to depend over the next couple of months what our numbers come in at. So that could be across the board purchasing freeze, that could be over a certain amount, that could be asking departments to look back on, can you get by the rest of the year without purchasing it? So I guess I'll go back to the sales tax real quick. So I think what this is building into for 2019 is identifying ways to bring us back to structural balance if sales tax is really coming in this low. So you can see some of the ways we're starting to consider, but this is also building into 2020. So as you all know, we'll be coming with a proposed budget and the discussions in the next several months. But I think in 2020, we really have to consider all of our revenue sources and we have to consider all of our expenses. So initially, the departments have returned their budget cuts that we asked. So we asked about a 3% for each department. They've returned those. But I will say these are really difficult decisions, and we really are at a point where revenues also have to be considered. So I know that as a body, a mill levy increase is never something that we really want to do. We understand how much our citizens are taxed, but I think at some point we're going to have to consider our revenues. So we're not necessarily there yet. But I just wanted to put that out there that is something that we're starting to consider in terms of, you know, the out years. Okay, so now looking at the expenses are up 1.5% overall. General fund is actually down slightly. Water expenses are up 10.7%, but that's driven by commodities largely. Stormwater expense is up 30.5%, and that obviously jumps off the page at you. However, that's driven by the delivery of a Vector truck. So that if you take that out, it's not 30%. And then wastewater expenses are up 4.6%, and that is largely due to the timing of journal entries and the allocation of utilities administration expense. So in summary, we're really watching our economically sensitive revenues. We're trying our best to make sure that these expenses overall will come in to match. If revenues are coming down, we have to look at expenses and bring those down as well. I believe that is the end of the presentation, but I'm here for questions.
Deputy Mayor Claire.
How does online sales tax figure into that?
You know, It's a great question. That's one we're starting to explore as well. I don't have a specific answer for you, but hopefully we can provide some more information over the next couple weeks.
And would a hiring freeze be expanded to TPD and TFD? Or is that just?
I'm not we haven't discussed that yet.
Yeah.
Right now, we haven't extended it that far, based on the fact that we have an academy class that's starting on May 20th with 17. We'd recruited them. We didn't want to lose that. But as the months continue, we'll have to make sure that we're taking a look at how these expenses are, how the revenues are coming as we go in. Our intent is we have a class of 9 that we expect to try and fill, and part of the reasoning of doing that and so forth will be explained more when we get in the 2020 budget as to what changes we might make there that would accommodate what we're doing with the academy classes in 19.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Jessen.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would a purchasing freeze affect our road work projects, or are those all independently funded anyway?
Well, I think a lot of them are capital funded, so that usually when you have those funds on hand, those aren't impacted by purchasing freezes.
So it would just be general fund things?
At this point, that's what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Didn't you say that purchasing is up? Is that correct? I mean, what are we buying so much of? Did I read that wrong?
You mean total expenses from all city funds would be 1.5%. The general fund's down 0.3%.
Okay.
The other utility items, they obviously look like bigger numbers, but you also have an increased revenue with the anticipation that more expense was going to go out. And there are several of the variances, like water is commodities, and we just don't have a lot of choice on that. Stormwater, the other two are really a timing. We do March 31st, and that's our cutoff. But if you saw into April, you'd see it start to level out.
So are you saying, are you saying that we're putting a freeze on stuff because we're spending too much?
No, ma'am. We're considering a purchasing freeze that's not implemented yet. We're still determining the best way in the event we have to use it, that we would implement it. We are waiting for another sales tax, another month or two. And if those come in as we're showing them coming in, then we will be looking at that as a real option.
So are we looking at everything we're purchasing then?
Yes, ma'am. We will be if it's a purchasing freeze. Obviously, we ask the departments to be responsible with their budgets. We do look at those big items. Personnel is coming in and close to what we expected, and that's quite frankly the largest portion of our budget. So the expense growth, that's reasonable that we're seeing in the general fund because it's gone down 0.3%.
Okay, so that's why it's okay.
Yeah, and it's that our revenues are coming in so much lower than budget that it can't meet what our expected expenditures were.
And we knew that was going to happen, right?
We knew that our revenues weren't going to meet budget?
I thought Nikki, we knew that, didn't we? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I thought Nikki had.
Yeah.
Well, each year we've managed looking at the number and projections for that, and have adjusted what we're putting in that sales tax number especially, and I think it was downward a little bit from what we had. Would say it went up, but not as much as we had been increasing it as a percentage from the previous years. So we tempered what we had for expectations already. The unfortunate part is we're seeing that actually come in even below that. And so we're wanting to make sure we don't go too far. We have the opportunity, and we started looking at holding these positions for 3 months about a month ago. And so we've been working, trying to make sure that we're managing it now versus trying to play catch up later on.
If I may, Mayor.
Yes.
Do we have any positions that they've applied for and they're waiting on us to respond? Do you know?
As far as positions within
Like you're saying, hold positions that become available?
Right.
Or I mean, there's
Yes.
nobody out there that have applied for it and they're not waiting on a job, are they?
We have tempered when we submit the availability of a position out to the general public, looking at the timing that it takes to go through the process of advertising, bringing them in for interviews, hiring, and when they'll start, and having that be a 3-month lag. So it might be that we wait a month and a half to 8 weeks, depending on the position, before we're putting it out for advertisement in order to make sure the timing is correct. And so Human Resources is managing that. The directors come in as they normally do, and we sit down through the position review committee, make decisions on which positions would be filled, and then establish a date as to when the projected hire would be, and then Human Resources back plans in order to accomplish that date.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm noting that franchise fees are down 12%. That's generally pretty constant. Did we lose? Did something expire?
Oh, the rebate, yeah, with Westar.
Yeah. Recently, Westar had a rebate that they gave to their employees. Our calculation on revenues is based on the charges that they receive. So if the customers received a rebate, their total bills was less. That causes our collections for franchise fee to be less because it's a percentage of what they're charged. And so they did one large rebate in 2018, and then another smaller one here at the beginning of 19, and so that's why we received less in our franchise fees.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Ms. Lamandola? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We now move on to the consent agenda, since I put the roll call before. Yes, sir.
A is approval of a tort claim submitted by CSAA General Insurance Company in the amount of $50,000 related to damage to a home at 1111 Southeast 33rd Terrace. B is an ordinance introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller designating a portion of the Crosby Place parking garage as temporarily exempt from the provisions of KSA 41719D and Topeka Municipal Code Section 915020E. C is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Jeff Cohen granting Specs Bar and Grill an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. D are minutes of the regular meeting of April 16, 2019, and there's a list of open after midnight applications. Staff is recommending approval.
What is the pleasure of the body? We have a motion for approval by Councilman Lesser and second by Councilman Jensen. Comments or questions with regards to the consent agenda? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to action items. Action item A, if the clerk would read.
A is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout amending the district map referred to and made a part of the zoning ordinances by Section 1850-050 of the Topeka Municipal Code by providing for certain changes in zoning on property located between Southwest 21st Street and Southwest 29th Street along the west side of Southwest Indian Hills Road from RR1 Residential Reserve District to R1 Single Family Dwelling District.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, governing body, you have before you a request for change to the Sherwood Village zoning. That's necessitated by the annexation, plat being approved, and now this is the next step, which is changing the zoning. We did receive the report back from the Planning Commission, and they approved this request unanimously, 7-0. And so staff is available for questions if there are any. Otherwise, we request approval.
Okay, before we proceed with anything, this is something that requires notification of ex parte communication. So at this point in time, I will just look around the room and just let anybody know that if you have had any ex parte communication, you are to let the body and the community know that even though you have received such communication, that you're able to make a fair assessment. So if anybody has received any that they would like to declare? Seeing none? Councilwoman Ortiz, pardon me.
I did receive some communication at work, and I can make a sound judgment.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Ortiz. At this point in time, ex parte has been expressed. Is there a motion? Councilman Jensen?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion. We have a second by Councilman Cohen. At this point in time, we do have discussion. Availability, is there any discussion? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to the next item, item B, if the clerk would read.
B is a public hearing on the advisability of establishing a community improvement district, CID, at Southwest 17th and Southwest Wanamaker, and an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout establishing a community improvement district at Southwest 17th Street and Southwest Wanamaker Road and levying a CID sales tax of 1% within the CID.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have before us a request to approval of the Community Improvement District for the 17th and Wanamaker project. I've executed the agreement after a successful negotiation with the developer, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Manager Gerber to make some additional comments, and I think potentially the developer is here to answer questions as well. So at this time, Deputy Manager.
Mr. City Manager, thank you. Good evening, governing body. This is a project, as you know, that we've had discussion over for about the last couple of months, including a nice presentation by the developer's representative about a month ago this time. What we're ultimately asking for tonight is for you to have a public hearing and then to approve a 1% CID for property located at the southeast corner of 17th and Wanamaker. In terms of this project, again, we're asking for a 1% CID for those properties. Again, we've talked about this, but a 1% CID simply means there'll be an additional 1% sales tax added on to the purchase there, and then that sales tax will be remitted to the developer for statutorily allowable reimbursements. This project is anticipated to be completed in 2 phases. The larger phase will consist of the work that you're seeing right now going on, which is the renovation of the old Kmart building. And then there's potentially a second phase that may be coming. I don't know if they're at the point yet where they're able to make any more comments on that, but there may be another phase on that. If both phases happen, it'll be just south of $34 million investment. If it just simply ends up being phase 1, that'll be $31.5 million. In terms of the incentives that we negotiated with the developer, we've also phased those so that the majority of the incentives come from the majority of the project. So a little over $6 million for phase 1, and then another $700,000 if phase 2 comes to fruition. City Manager mentioned the development agreement. Just a couple of things worth pointing out on that, I think. It's mostly standard language. You have it in your packet, and we could certainly go through that if you wanted to, but we have talked a little bit about reimbursement of interest cost, and we had what I would say was a robust discussion with Mr. Johnson related to that, and came to the conclusion that those costs will be allowed during the construction phase up to 5% interest cost. The other thing that we've talked about previously is this is a pay-as-you-go project, so the city won't be issuing bonds, again, reflective of our policy and the more conservative nature of the approach we want to take. And finally, in Section 9 of the development agreement, we have added some standards related to abiding by the new building design standards that have been adopted by the planning department and this body. So with that, I will stop. I will note that Bob Johnson is here to answer any questions you might have. And sitting next to Bob is Bob Sutton, who I think would be representing EIG, who'd be glad to answer any questions about Indiana basketball or maybe the project itself too. So thank you.
Are there any questions before we open the portion of the public? Okay. So at this point in time, we will open up the public hearing, allowing any individual in the community to speak about this CID at 17th and Wanamaker. Would anybody like to come and speak in this public hearing?
Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council, thanks for having us here tonight. Bob Johnson, Polsinelli Law Firm, Bob Sutton, EIG principal with that firm. Doug really encapsulated where we are today and that we've had a really robust discussion and negotiation with the staff, which I have to give the staff credit for, very professional, very informed. It was thorough, and I think we arrived at a mutually agreeable document that you have in front of you. We had a robust discussion at our last work session, and so I won't rehash all of those points here and spend your time tonight, but happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, I'll gladly go take my seat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So second call for the public hearing. Any individual that would like to speak on the CID, 17th and Wanamaker. Third call for anybody who would like to speak for the CID. Seeing no further comments, this public hearing is closed at this point in time. We open it up for discussion. Deputy Mayor Claire.
I was going to move to approve.
Oh. So we have a motion for approval by the Deputy Mayor. We have a second by Councilman Jensen. We're open for discussion. Councilman Jensen, to be followed by Councilman Emerson.
I just want to say thank you to all the parties involved here. It's obvious that it was a very professional conversation. It's been handled well, and I think this is just incredible evidence of our community being open for business and the business community wanting to do business with us. And this is an exciting project to move forward. Thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Two things. First of all, I wanted to thank Mr. Gerber for his work on this, and to publicly say, I know the last few months you've really stepped up giving us information and stuff and keep us on the loop. So I really appreciate that, and your Mr. Trout's work on this. Secondly, I was talking to a person today, and I will just tell you, I am in support of this, and generally I'm in support of CIDs because the difference for me is, unlike a TIF, they don't shift the tax burden to taxpayers. What they do, they're an avoidable tax. If you don't want to pay it, you don't patronize that. So I feel like that's a good balance between a business investing and being able to recoup some of the expenses. So for me, it's much less of a hurdle than a TIF would be. So thank you.
Additional comments, questions? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 8 yes with Cohen unless they're voting no.
8 having voted yes, this motion passes. We now move on to the next item, item C, if the clerk would read.
C is reconsideration of a conditional use permit to allow an AT&T communications tower at 513 through 519 Southwest Taylor.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I want to have City Attorney Lisa Robertson bring up a few points related to why we're looking at this and the procedure that we are going to hopefully move through tonight in order to consider this item. So, Lisa?
Thank you, City Manager. Governing body, as you're aware, there was a vote on April 2nd on a request for a conditional use permit by AT&T to put in a communication facility on the Brennan-Mathena Funeral Home site on Southwest Taylor Street. There was a motion to approve the Planning Commission recommendation, and that motion failed by a vote of 4 to 6. There are 6 votes that are necessary by, per state law to approve CUP requests, and there was no subsequent motions made to reject the CUP request, which would require 7 votes, or to remand. So therefore, there was no affirmative action taken on it. We need to affirmatively act. So during the interim period of time, AT&T did contact city staff. They indicated that they would talk with their technical folks and try to look at some alternate sites that might be available and might work for them. A week or 2 later, they notified us that they did not find any sites that would work and that they were going to pursue the Brennan-Mathena Funeral Home site, and that they were going to continue on with their request and not withdraw the conditional use permit. So at this point in time, we need to affirmatively vote to either approve or reject or remand the request by AT&T for the conditional use permit. So the first step in the process would be to suspend the governing body rule 6.3G that deals with reconsideration to lift that 6-month restriction. If that were passed, then the next task would be to do a motion for reconsideration of the CUP request so that AT&T knows what direction they need to go depending on what the governing body's decision is. And that particular motion would need to be made by a member of the prevailing party. So I believe that would be Councilmember Mays, Councilmember Hiller, I'm going off memory. Padilla, Emerson, no, not Emerson.
We're reading
Padilla.
a memo.
So, okay, good, thank you. So that's just kind of basically a background on it. So if you want to proceed with the first step, that it would be suspending the governing body rule 6.3G.
And City Attorney, before we proceed, I did want to have clarification, because I think that this is one of those situations that with the public, it's important to note, it's very difficult for the city that we have to have this item brought to us when there is already a path that is established both by the federal level and the state level on how we can and will manage the situation. So it's one of those things that it's been wonderful to see the council members advocate on behalf of the constituency. And this is just my way of telling the community, your council has been advocating. But there are regulations that we have to abide by as well. And we're trying everything we can. So before we proceed with anything, so at this point in time, my question to the body is there a motion from anybody from the prevailing side to suspend the rules so that we could talk about this item once more?
Move to suspend the rules to reconsider this item.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Hiller. We have a second to suspend the rules. At this point in time, we proceed by voting. This would suspend the rules so that we could bring up this item again to the body.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes. At this point in time, we would need a second motion, which would be a motion to reconsider this item. Is there anybody that is willing to make such motion? From the prevailing side, yes. That was on the prevailing side. So Councilman Jensen would make that motion to reconsider.
Second.
We have a second by Councilwoman Hiller. We have two individuals on the prevailing side making that motion. This just opens it up for us to reconsider this item that had been already closed down and voted no on. So we proceed by voting to reconsider this item.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We are about to reconsider the CUP with AT&T. And before we go any further, this is one of those items that requires any disclosure of ex parte communication. So at this point in time, we will open up for any individual who has had any ex parte communication on this item, and that they could disclose that they feel, even though they have received that information, that they are able to make a fair and impartial decision on this item. Deputy Mayor Claire.
Yes, I did, and yes, I can.
Councilman Jensen.
Me as well.
Councilman Ortiz. Councilman Emerson.
The same, Mayor.
Councilman Padilla.
Same for me, Mayor.
Councilman Mays.
I think we've all heard from AT&T. I think I'm good.
All right.
Making a decision.
All right, so, Councilwoman Hiller.
And if we can keep it that short, yeah, me too.
Okay, awesome. I think we can. Yes, we can. So that being said, the council members, all of us have disclosed the fact that we have received information from AT&T and are still able to make an impartial decision. That being the case, we now move on to the discussion item. So at this point in time, any discussion on this item? Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. If memory serves correctly, when this was coming up, there was a note, I think, from the city attorney's office that said that pretty much any of these that are challenged are always overthrown. And so why were we told to vote or recommended to vote no on this particular one, but yes on the others, I guess is kind of what I was wanting to know.
Councilmember Cohen, I believe that was a staff recommendation from the planning department, and the planning commission actually made the recommendation to approve the CUP.
Councilman Jensen.
Motion to remand to the planning.
We have a motion to, we have a second and a motion and a second to remand this to the planning commission. Are there any discussions with regards to that determination before the body proceeds? Deputy Mayor Clear.
Are we still in the discussion stage, or do we have to do that?
We now are, because we have a motion and a second, so now we're open to discussion.
Can I ask the AT&T people a question?
Ms. Robertson?
Mayor, I believe they've entered documents onto the record, correct. So, I mean, my preference would be that the information that they provided and that was attached to the packet, I'm sure people have read it, but they have actually, it's on the record, so perhaps it's okay for them to.
What if it's not on the record?
It is, because, I'm sorry, Councilmember Clear, there was a letter that was written, I believe the date was April 26th. It was from the attorney for AT&T, and it was attached to the agenda item and posted.
No, but something, say I learned that I wanted to ask them about that's not on the record.
Well, typically what we've done is we don't take additional comment that wasn't on the record previously.
Okay. All right, Councilwoman Hiller.
Let me take a stab at this. I guess I think that we should always be able to take comments in that the reason we would remand it back is if we think there's information that the Planning Commission didn't have. And one of the challenges that we have is we can't discover that unless we listen to our constituents or do that deep dive that it sounds like everyone did. And I just wanted to, I'm open to some discussion. My inclination right now is not to remand it back because I think we all have a lot of information and we should just make a decision. AT&T at one point said they were willing to forego the deadline that they had for the 20th of May, but I'm just not sure what more would happen at the Planning Commission at this point. And as I've kind of tried to think through where I am and how I would vote, what I recalled was that we went into that discussion, has it been a month ago? Okay. My concern, this is in my district and in a neighborhood that I represent, was that we definitely wanted 5G capability and the best possible cell service. We did not want a cell desert anywhere, certainly in my case, in my district and in Ward Mead neighborhood. But we didn't, we understood that there wasn't, we couldn't say no because of health risks, that was not legal. But what the Planning Commission staff had suggested was that we could, under the golden rule, if there was a real estate reason that would cause harm to the neighborhood. What happened in the meeting was that another member of our council suggested that the poles weren't necessary, that we could get the same amount of service with small cell boxes, and that's why I changed my vote. If we didn't have to do that, and I said so at the time, our subsequent research has satisfied me that in fact we need those tall poles in order to cascade, if you will, and it's not a technical term, the cells down to those small boxes and to the residences. And so that education helped my concern that actually was raised at the meeting. The other thing that happened, though, is once we distilled all that down, we talked at the neighborhood level, and it seemed like, well, okay, if there was a chance to go after Golden, but we wanted cell service, then we needed to be able to find another site that was within the parameters of what they were looking for that would not be as unsatisfactory as the one that was proposed. And I just want to give AT&T credit. They sent a lot of material to the neighborhood. I met with them, as many people did, but they also were willing to act. We talked about it at the neighborhood meeting, and one of the residents actually said, well, what about, and suggested a couple of other sites. And although I think legally they didn't have to do it, AT&T did. They disclosed what they looked at before. We were familiar with those sites. And they did go ahead and check into whether the sites that the citizen recommended would work. And they were outside of AT&T's report to us was that it was outside that sweet spot that they needed to. Actually, the shortfall is downtown. There's so much pressure in the downtown area, so they needed a site that would overlap part of downtown. So at this point, we're pretty satisfied that they did the deep dive and looked at all the options. I have not had any other feedback from the residents at this point. So I wanted to thank them, and without being aware of any other options or anything to give the Planning Commission to reconsider, I would vote no on a remand and have us vote here.
So Councilwoman Heller, are you proposing an amendment and requesting from the individuals who have made a motion to change before we vote?
Perhaps
Yeah, I don't think that'd be.
Mayor,
It would have
perhaps
to
a
be an
substitute
alternate motion.
motion.
It would have to be a substitute motion.
A substitute motion.
But he hasn't explained his reasoning, and so perhaps he.
Before we go there, Councilman Lesser, to be followed by Councilman Jensen.
That was exactly what my question was. What was, if I could ask Councilman Jensen what his reasoning was for remanding it back?
Absolutely. Councilman Jensen.
Well, a 150-foot pole does not fit the character of that neighborhood, and there are lots of different ways of providing coverage to an area. There's lots of different types of towers and communication structures, and we're trying to preserve the character of our historic neighborhoods. Putting a tower up there does not meet the goal of preserving that character. So that's why I'm suggesting to remand it back to look at an alternative that would fit the character of the neighborhood better.
Deputy Mayor Clear, to be followed by Councilwoman Heller.
I guess I would ask you, what are the other alternatives? Because I know underground isn't one.
Councilman.
What are some?
Councilwoman Heller, if you would like to go before.
Same question.
Okay, Councilman Jensen.
There's a number of different options to how you can place antennas to accomplish providing coverage. There's different styles of towers as well. So, I would leave it up to those folks to figure out what best suits their needs, but
I think they did
something
that.
within the character of the neighborhood is absolutely a requirement. So in
think
some of
they-
the research I had done in other communities, they've hidden cell phone towers inside church steeples, for example. So, and that fit the character of that neighborhood in that area much better.
Additional comments or questions from the body? Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I do feel that if we have a lot of questions, I think it'd be great to hear from someone from AT&T. We did not have any feedback from them when we discussed this the first time. And perhaps that could have cleared up a lot of these questions the first go-round. And so, I think rather than us speculating with one another, I think it'd be a good idea that if we do have specific questions, I think they're probably the people to talk to. And I feel like in the past with other zoning issues and things that have had ex parte communications, we've allowed public comment. So I don't see why we wouldn't tonight.
Mayor, if the body would like to suspend Rule 5.4, that would be appropriate. 5.4 just talks about the fact that public hearings on zoning matters shall be conducted at the Planning Commission, and no additional public hearings shall be held by the governing body. So you could suspend that rule and allow AT&T or anyone else to comment?
Councilman Lesser.
Motion to suspend Rule 5.4.
We have a motion to suspend that rule.
Point of order, Mayor. Can we, since we have an existing motion on the table, can we?
And that is, there is a motion on the table.
I would be happy to withdraw my motion so we can suspend the rules. Although we did suspend all of the rules in our previous motion. We didn't suspend a specific rule.
I'm sorry, I made reference to 6.3G, so hopefully we didn't suspend all of them.
Okay. Previous motion was to suspend the rules.
Okay, so now, the motion made by Councilman Jensen of remanding to the Planning Commission has been pulled. Therefore, we now have the availability to make a motion by Councilman Lesser to suspend the rule that would allow us. Oh, Councilwoman Ortiz, would you agree? Thank you. Now that we have agreement by the illustrious Councilwoman Ortiz, we now have the opportunity to hear the motion made by Councilmember Lesser to suspend the rule that does not allow us to have these conversations after things have gone to the planning commission. We have a second by Councilman Emerson. Any discussion on this? Seeing no discussion, we proceed by voting.
Councilmember Hiller? I'm sorry, pressed it once. Yeah. We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, now we are able to have communications with the members of the public that were involved in this process and also the AT&T vendors. At this point in time, City Manager, would it be adequate for us to invite the employees of AT&T, the representatives, to the podium?
Whomever, Lane, I'm not sure who you would like to have come forward, but please designate someone. Thank you.
Molly Coker-Boyle, Regional Vice President for AT&T Kansas of External Affairs.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to talk to us tonight.
And Glenda Kafer is here, our outside counsel, who shared a packet of materials with you, I think, last week.
So, Deputy Mayor Clear.
Somewhere along the line, I heard something about the 9/11 that has an effect on, can you explain that?
Absolutely. So this site that we proposed will serve multiple purposes. One, it'll serve our commercial customers, but it is also a FirstNet site. FirstNet is a network that is dedicated to public safety emergency responders. It came out of the 9/11 Commission report. Basically, one of the failures that came to light as a result of 9/11 was a communications failure. Fire couldn't talk to police. In addition to commercial networks were overwhelmed, couldn't keep up with the traffic. So after that report, the federal government went through a process of deciding to develop a broadband network dedicated to public safety, and it's called FirstNet. So they opened that up for a bid. AT&T was ultimately selected as the vendor for the FirstNet service, and so now it is our obligation to the federal government as the vendor to build out that dedicated FirstNet network to all emergency responders. And so we are putting that up on this site as well. So it's going on all of our existing network as well as new sites as we build them.
Yeah, thank you.
Additional questions for the AT&T representatives? Councilwoman Hiller.
I think that the reason people wanted to talk was to have you respond to the issue of whether there are alternates that might be more appealing, even if the tariffs say that it doesn't matter.
No, I mean, our goal is always to, do what we can to provide service to our customers while also taking into consideration the aesthetics of a neighborhood. So with this 100-foot monopole structure, we made all of the changes that were recommended at the Planning and Zoning Commission with the landscaping, with moving the site on the location of the property. I think it was all detailed in that packet that we provided to you. So I would say to the extent that, there were more changes, I think at that previous council meeting, that this is the least visually impactful design, absent it not being there at all. And our feeling is that, it not being there at all is not an option given the network needs that we've shown that we need to serve your constituents and our customers. So to the extent that there are additional things that we could do at the planning and zoning level, I can't speak to that, not being our network engineer, but I do think, we showed our willingness to make all the accommodations that were requested at that level to make it, again, as least visually impactful as we could.
Additional questions? Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for being here. In the documentation that your council provided, you guys make mention of this being a macro site. Can you just briefly explain what that is, please?
Absolutely. So there's what we call our macro network, which are the larger structures, and that's what we'll be using. That's what we currently use for our 4G LTE service. It's what we'll deploy 5G on, and that's sort of, again, I'm probably going to get out of the weeds on the technical standpoint, but that's sort of the backbone. That's sort of the layer. When we talk about small cells, that's, again, which Councilwoman Hiller referenced, that's sort of the secondary layer. It's not going to replace any of these macro structures because, again, that's sort of the backbone of our network. But what it'll do will augment and work in conjunction with those. So for areas where there's a targeted need, we will deploy those small cells, again, to kind of bring that network closer to the users. But if you were to use a highway analogy, our macro network is, you know, the turnpike. Sometimes we'll try to add a lane here or there, and those small cells help us do it. But the macro network, those big structures are, again, sort of the core service of the wireless network.
Thank you.
My best.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I appreciate you guys providing all the information you did. That was helpful to understand exactly what you're trying to do here, as opposed to just put up a pole in the air. My concern, though, is that it doesn't fit the character of the neighborhood. That's something we've strived to do in this community, and I feel badly that the Planning Commission didn't properly communicate that to you. I guess I'm just curious why, as you guys were designing the network and the structure here, that there wasn't more emphasis on trying to preserve the look and the feel of the area.
Absolutely. So I will say that when we design these, our first goal is always to provide the service in the most effective way possible. So that's our number one goal, is to make sure that when we're putting these up, we're actually accomplishing what we need to. The second goal is, how can we make it as aesthetically pleasing without compromising mission number one? So while there are, you know, different things that can be used from a stealthing perspective, again, since those weren't requested at that level, we did everything from a street level view. Let's put up decorative fencing, decorative landscaping, again, because that won't compromise goal number one, which is to provide the service. In terms of your suggestion about putting in a steeple, as you will see in the alternate site analysis, we proposed many of the church locations that may have worked for a steeple approach declined to accept our offer. So we were left with, this is the option and this is where we can go. In terms of alternate, again, stealthing opportunities, I mean, you could ultimately send it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. They could come up with additional recommendations, but I would go back to my initial point is that, you know, the service needs are there right now. The longer this process takes on, the longer constituents are negatively impacted by the delay in us addressing this service need. So I would ask you to keep that in consideration as you weigh that with the other discussion items.
How long would it take you to come up with some different stealthing opportunities?
I mean, again, I'm not the network engineer, so, you know, for the time that it goes, you know, to be back, and I don't know what your timing schedule is from a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, you know, how long it would take to get back on the agenda, how long it would take, I mean.
But you would agree there are other opportunities to hide this better that we just didn't explore because we didn't ask?
You know, I can't speak to that. I don't know. I would have to look to our network folks to say, okay, what would our options be? I believe we did have that discussion, and, you know, their point again was, you know, we made all the accommodations at the Planning and Zoning level. So I don't know, not being the network expert,
well,
the
thank you for
tower
coming
expert.
tonight.
Thank you for letting me speak.
Additional questions from the body or comments? Councilwoman Hiller.
I don't think we have anything tall enough in that whole area to put a 100-foot pole inside. Pardon? Topeka High? The loop that they looked at was 4th Street to 8th Street, from about Tyler to Western.
Councilman Jensen?
Well, and different structures or different heights that can be used differently. I mean, there's a cell tower on top of one of the housing authority buildings, and I don't believe that's 100-foot high. So it just depends on how the network engineers can work with things. I would again tender my motion to remand. I would be interested in knowing what the other masking opportunities are. I mean, this is our one chance. I mean, I agree we need to build cell capacity. I'm not arguing that, but this is our one chance to try and protect the look and the feel of this neighborhood as much as possible. And if there are other options, I feel obligated to find out, or the other masking options, I feel obligated to find out before allowing them to put up an aluminum pole.
Deputy Mayor Clear.
Actually, what I remember, and you might correct me if I'm wrong, the neighborhood doesn't have a problem with this. They do have a problem with this.
Well,
Councilwoman Hiller?
There was an initial meeting when the neighborhood
Right.
meeting occurred, and a number of people had researched, particularly the issue of health, and there was some pretty robust discussion about that. AT&T provided a fairly substantial amount of pretty scientific information from respectable sources that was not the case. It is also, the law says that you can't turn one down because of health reasons. It further says you can't turn it down for aesthetic reasons. And so part of that deep dive was to say, well, can you ever? And really, the only thing, and our own legal staff said, they felt like going after a real estate use. You can't go after it because of your property values. It hasn't been demonstrated, apparently, by the research that was provided to us. But it would only be if it prohibited the land use and if that was significant. So, as I recall, so somebody else, either Mary Feeney's here and others who were at but the people that came did not come back to the subsequent neighborhood meetings and are not here.
Councilman Mays?
I have a quick question. A quick Google search here, and it shows there are often a lot of masking opportunities where they are sometimes disguised as trees or flagpoles or things like that. Has anything like that been looked into in this case?
I'd have to defer to the discussion that was at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Having not been there, I'm not familiar with those came up, but I know those have been used in various circumstances. Again, I don't know if those circumstances are applicable to this structure. But.
Okay. So, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I did some checking with Director Finder regarding if AT&T was ready to present whatever they would need to do for research. The next meeting is May 20th. We could send out a notice this week to the neighborhood related to that and get it on the agenda for May 20th for consideration, if assuming AT&T was prepared by that date. So we would need to meet with them and determine if that's possible. Otherwise, it would be the next meeting is after that is June 17th.
At this point in time, what is the pleasure of the body? Councilman Jensen.
I would be happy to defer it if there's some options here, but this property sitting here would not be used for anything else ever again.
I think that in order to defer it would have to be remanded because it wouldn't be seen here. It would
Okay.
be seen at the Planning Commission.
Well, so then my motion stands for a better fit.
Okay, so we have a motion made to remand it to the Planning Commission. Is there a second to this motion? Second. We have a second. So at this point in time, a vote yes would mean that this would be remanded back to the Planning Commission. Staff would take care of talking with AT&T to see if the meeting on the 20th of May or June 7th, I think where the dates would be dates that would work for them. So if there's no further questions on this item, we proceed by voting.
Okay, the motion failed. We had 8 no and Councilmembers Ortiz and Emerson voting yes. Or Jensen, excuse me, Jensen and Ortiz voting yes.
So this is not then remanded to the Planning Commission. I think that we have the ability to make another motion at this point in time. Is there, Council, Deputy Mayor Claire?
Move to approve?
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? We have a motion to approve in a second. Any discussion or comments on this item? Additional? Seeing none, we proceed by voting. This motion for yes would approve the installation of the pole as presented.
Requires 6 votes.
The 6, yes, correct.
We have 9 yes, Mr. Jensen voting no.
9 having voting yes, this motion passes. At this point in time, we move on to item D, if the clerk would read.
D is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller, Tony Emerson, and Jeff Cohen, sitting as the Policy and Finance Committee, amending Article 2 of the City of Topeka Personnel Code relating to residency requirements.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, tonight I have a few comments as we get started, just to kind of go back in history and look at where we're at and some of the issues that were brought forward. This policy change was considered at the committee level, and I'll let the committee members discuss what their positions were related to it, but we looked at the elimination of the residency requirement for all positions to allow department directors eliminate all residency requirements for all positions. And it would also allow department directors to work with human resources to establish guidelines regarding a response time by job description. Some of the issues that we listed as far as reasons for the requested change are the ability to have an increased recruitment pool by allowing to allow people that want to stay living where they are currently outside of Shawnee County to be able to live there and work for the city of Topeka, with the hope that that might capture some additional qualified people for positions that we have within the city. We talked about the issue of being personal liberty to choose where you want to live instead of being required to live in the county per this rule. It is also employment situations can arise related to retention that cause a choice to be made between dual income families, and also allowing management personnel that, as you see, we've had discussions and looked at, that they care about the jobs that they do as professionals, and that the idea that they still give their full to work within this community whether they live here or do not. We have looked at a couple of alternatives that maybe could be considered related to this. We looked at the variable of considering implementing this for individuals that once they got to a management or supervisor level position, they would then be required to move to the community. It has really become our only real possibility as far as change. We looked at the possibility of providing a shorter or a reduced paycheck to individuals. 80% of our employees relate to a union contract that prevents us from changing a different rate for that salary, and so that would only affect a smaller group of people. So the idea of making it a requirement for those that are supervisory is really our only option if you want to amend what we presented from what we can tell. Currently, just so you understand, currently, once you complete probation, you have 6 months to move to the community. When it comes to most employees, if you're a police or fire employee, you have a longer period of time because the probation period for those positions is longer. So we ask that you consider this option. We've heard lots of testimony from a variety of employees, directors, and so forth. We feel this is important for us as a potential to help us, especially in the area of recruitment. So that's all my comments.
Thank you, City Manager. Prior to us having our discussion, there are several individuals who have signed up to speak. I would like to give them the opportunity to speak first to us. The first individual signed up to speak is Ms. Linda Cook.
First of all, thank you. My name is Linda Cook, and I am a resident of the Ward Mead District. Having a residential requirement has not been the answer for drawing applicants. Many times, one spouse may find employment in one city and the other in a near city. Commuting has become a way of life in the current times. Persons that I know drive from Lawrence for healthcare positions. When these positions are not filled, they have to hire traveling providers, which costs much more. Demand is greater than available licensed therapists, and the same is true for all other employment positions that is imperative for the fire and the police department. It is hard enough to find police and fire applicants, and they may not want to live in the city. All people are not city dwellers. They will be able to live where they please and be qualified for the job. I've given this a lot of thought, a lot of notes. I just don't think it's reality, and I don't think it's fair to dictate this restriction with the applicants living out of the city and county. I think that when they want to do the job, they apply for the job, and they will become a part of our community. They just don't have to live in the city. It's just my position that not everybody wants to live in the city, but they want to work for the city. So I think that ought to be given a chance to come and work for Topeka.
Okay. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
The next individual signed up to speak is Mr. Pat Delap.
Howdy. I'm not for this ordinance, and I'll tell you why. We're a city of first class. 25 cities of first class reside in Kansas. If we have people living in Shawnee County, and since we opened it up, I'd like to see it closed down even further of living in the city itself, which all directors should be doing. They'll have a vested interest in the community, more so commuting from far distances. Now, when you work for government, most people consider that public service. You're doing a good thing for it. It's not supposed to be about yourself. If it's about yourself, well, then the employees are basically just hired help. I want people to be part of my community, not the hired help. Having them live in the county or in the city even with the directors will increase our tax bases. The city will meet some of its required revenues, and we're here tonight, our revenues are going down. They will not only help the city, but what about our school system, who is sorely hurting for money right now? There's mention that police doesn't want to live in the city. That was just something blogged. I don't believe that because they're scared of the criminals in Topeka to bring their families in and their wives. Nonsense. They're that scared about it. They shouldn't be police officers. They will own houses in the city, increasing the value of everybody's homes. Right now, doing active neighborhood improvements, they have stopped building new homes because they were selling them, could only sell them for about 60% of it would cost to build them. That's a problem. And we're encouraging people, go ahead, move someplace else. Move someplace else, live where you want. Department heads who own upper-end houses, and they do because they're making that kind of money, you know, they're building out $200,000, $300,000 homes or better out in the county, or, I hate to say it, some are kind of sneaking around and they don't even live in the county. Most cities our size require department heads to live within the city limits. Other people, no, they go other places. As we know, 80% are not department heads or even close to that. They're under the union things. These department heads set or influence many policies you and I have to follow. They should be able to benefit for their good decisions or what? Suffer the consequences of those poor decisions they made too. And the decisions they made will last years until it's changed. Having residency requirement is also a fantastic way of stopping middle-class flight from the city or even from the county. I don't have a problem with them living in the county. A little bit I do. But department heads should be living in the city completely. Now, there's been claims, what I passed around, we can't attract people. Well, if that's the case, well, then we need to do a better job of attracting them. I passed around, that's e-notify of jobs available in the city. There's only 6 located there. 6 jobs. And then you go to the personnel, the human resources section, there's 22. Why aren't the 22 all 23 other jobs listed on there. They should be. You know, we can go to university colleges that have people with a certain degree that we're looking for. Just call the human resource, the career centers up there, or the department heads, put it on there. We don't have to have a job fair at the university. It's going to cost a lot of money. 10-minute phone call, that is solved. Here are some cities that have some of their requirements. For one of them, which is kind of interesting, is very, very strict, is the Uniform Government, the Human Resources Guide. What they do is they require every employee to live within the boundaries of the Human Resources Guide. They're given...
Mr. DeLapp, your time has expired. Would you like an extension?
I would. I would like an extension.
How long do you think you need, a minute or 2?
3-4 minutes.
I'll motion for 2 minutes.
A motion for 2 minutes? Do we have a motion and a second? All those in favor of extending 2 minutes to Mr. DeLapp? Proceed by voting.
We have 8 yes.
8 having voting yes, the motion passes. Mr. DeLapp, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Uniform Government requires all city employees to live there. Few exceptions, if you live in a place outside of the city, you're allowed, or outside of their boundaries, you're allowed to stay there. However, if you move from that location where you live, where you're grandfathered in, you have to then move in the city, like if you buy a new house or things like this. And they're pretty freaking strict about it. They want them to be domicile. Domicile is different from residence. Domicile means some place that you're always going to return to, not the place where you just hang your hat for the night or the week. How do they check out their employees? Well, they check their driver's license, they have auto registration addresses, they check voter's registration, they will check your bank account and your credit cards to see where those statements are going to, the enrollment of your children. If your children are located in a school district that's not within your area, what's going on with this? They'll also ask for a phone number and address, which an off-duty employee can be routinely reached at 2 a.m. in the morning. Wichita has a requirement of only, a 30-minute drive within the city. You cannot be exceeding the speed limit. They don't want that. Hayes, Kansas requires inside the city limits. If you're a city employee, you're not allowed to take that car home unless you're actually living in the city. And that's what some of them do too. This came to a head because of the fact, gentlemen, we've got a high-paid city employee, not even living in the county, but living in Missouri. And it's been a long, long time. Excuses were given. Well, maybe I can't sell my house or things like this. And now all of a sudden, it moved again. Something's happened that it's came to a head. And do we let this employee go? Does he comply? Or what? You know what? If that's what it comes down to, we need to just say bye. We could probably find somebody else.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. DeLapp. The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Issa Miller.
From Sweetie.
Good evening, everybody. I think most of you know who I am. I have been the past president in North Topeka West NIA for 13 years. So that qualifies me to know I've dealt with most of the departments in our city and a lot of people. Seen a lot of people go and I see a lot of people come. I've lived here almost 65 years. I think that we should not change anything that we have. This is why. I've talked to a lot of people, and I've noticed in our departments, when people go, instead of looking entered in our departments, we seem to keep looking outward, and we hire people from out of state more than we do local. We've got Washburn University. We have Washburn Tech, that we're teaching these people how to get jobs. They're more than qualified to do these jobs. These are where we need to look. We need to look in our city. And we always talk about revenue. And this is what gets me. I talk about what we need and I always get back. We need revenue. So here's revenue for you. I'll use my other half as a prime example. He worked in Leavenworth for many years. He did not spend a dime in Leavenworth when he worked there. He didn't even buy his gas there. So if we're talking revenue, you're going to bring people in from other cities and that, they're going to go back home and spend their money there. They're not going to spend their money here and be invested in our city, and that's what we need. We need people that will be invested in our city and that really care. It's just going to be a 9-to-5 job to them. So just keep that in mind when you vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
I hate following Teresa. Anyway, good evening, governing body. I've sent you emails. I hope you've had a chance to look at that. I spoke about this back in February. Have not changed my mind. I'm still completely opposed to this. I actually don't see any reason to do it. I just heard earlier tonight we have our police department class filled. I heard that we have revenue problems. We need more revenue. Well, that's called top population growth. That's called people living here, helping pay the tax base, helping pay the franchise fees on our utility bills. For those who live here, you know about that. For those who live outside the city even, you don't know about that. And you may be a department head and not even be aware that the good people of this city are paying even sales tax on top of the franchise fee on our utility bills to our businesses and our homes. So I would say that I also mentioned that we have Washburn Law School here. We have Washburn University here. We have plenty of people to recruit for these jobs in the city of Topeka. Until 2013, we actually had a very strong outpost of KU here called the Capitol Complex, which I attended a number of my classes in the MPA program, which is the top school in the country, and how you train city managers to do these very jobs that you're looking so far around and not looking locally to get the very talent that you probably could get to do a lot of these jobs. People who already live here and would be happy to live in Shawnee County or Topeka and solve the problems that are so mountainous here. Another thing that concerns me is that with Momentum 2022, which is a very large community effort, we've been trying, and one of the problems that's been cited is we have too many people coming to Topeka taking the highest paid jobs. About 40% of the highest paid jobs are held by out-of-county people who work here. And when you're dealing with the private sector, it's a little different. But with the public sector, we have an absolute right to say where people live. And quite frankly, we're very generous with our current policy. You don't even have to live in Topeka. We have 550 square miles of choice. It's called Shawnee County. 65 of those miles are within the city of Topeka, but if you're not satisfied with that, you can even be a department head and actually live outside the city in any of those 550 square miles. There's, I believe, 8 different school districts to choose from. And so I am not convinced that there is an urgency to do this. I'm certainly not convinced it's been well vetted. I want to go back to my earlier comments in February. I said, if this is being driven by bargaining units, which I did not believe, but if it was, then bring it up in bargaining and allow the city a way to allow these bargaining units to bargain for that. But if they're going to bargain, they've got to give up something. That's what good negotiators do. Maybe they need to relay that down here, but we get something back when we give something away. And so even though I would be in opposition to that, it's at least a way to make sure we don't have our supervisors and department heads living in Kansas City, Missouri, if that's where these people are living, in Johnson County. I can greatly, easily see and foresee that happening in Overland Park, Olathe, any number of these Johnson County cities. They'll be commuting to take these higher paid jobs. My time up?
Yes, sir. Would you like an extension, sir?
I think 2 minutes to wrap this up would be sufficient if it's okay with the body.
We have a motion by Councilman Emerson, and we have a second by Councilmember Padilla. We now proceed by voting.
Ma'am, 7 yes.
7 voting yes, the motion passes. You have 2 minutes, Mr. Ledbetter.
Okay, I guess I wore out my welcome with some people. Okay, so the thing I want to greatly stress here is that I don't think there's an exigent circumstance here, and I believe that when I talk to people, including other business people, we just are baffled at the so-called urgency of this because we don't see the need. We're not seeing this huge amount of people that won't work here, including and live here. One of the things I'm also concerned about is all the police cars that are going to be exiting town at 5 o'clock. And although I believe this police chief probably would not allow that, that doesn't mean that future police chiefs would have that same resolve. And not that we want to replace them, but I'm saying that in time, you've got to look down the road at what you're doing here. And how much more of the CIP are you going to have to increase in expenditures, though you were just talking about in the quarterly update, to pay the millions of extra dollars we're going to need to replace that equipment that is getting a lot more mileage driving home to Overland Park or Holton or Linden or Manhattan. I'm sure those people enjoy those cars in their neighborhoods. I know several years back, about 10 years ago, when I lived in the same neighborhood I'm living in now, and I moved out to the country for a while, we had code enforcement, which was really nice, but we also had 3 police cars within a block of my house. I mean, it was the safest neighborhood in Topeka. And these guys were bringing their cars home at night. I mean, one block away, one another block, and one was behind me. I said, wow, what a great place. And I'm sure that the residents of Johnson County will appreciate those police cars being in their neighborhoods, courtesy of the taxpayers of Topeka, knowing they didn't even have to pay for it. I'm sure they'll be grateful. I was certainly grateful to see them in my neighborhood. So I'm absolutely opposed to this. Again, it should have been dealt with in the bargaining units. It should definitely not apply to our supervisors and our department heads, including even our lawyers, as far as I'm concerned. I think these higher paid people need to live here, at least in Shawnee County, and help participate in the tax base and the problems here. Did my time go out? I didn't.
No. I accidentally forgot to push the button.
Right. You see that was God's work.
Well, thank you for being cognizant that your time was expiring.
Well, the timer says I got a minute. But you know what? I'm going to graciously step down.
Thank you for being graceful.
I think Mr. Lesser's had enough for the day.
Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. The last person signed up to speak is Mr. Matt Blassingame.
The shot clock person there.
Good evening, governing body.
Good evening.
Matt Blassingame, Fraternal Order Police. Want to thank you all for taking the time to consider this issue. I know that the committee and the council put a lot of time and work into it, and that's greatly appreciated. I just want to encourage you to do away with the residency requirement. For me, the biggest issue with the residency requirement is just so that we can be competitive, so that our city and our police department can be competitive with other agencies across the state and in our region with what we consider to be our competitive cities. Mr. DeLapp said that the unified government requires that you live in I think he said the city, but the unified government of Wyandotte County, they require you to live in Wyandotte County. That is our only competitive city that requires you to live in the county. He mentioned Wichita. Wichita does require that you live within 30 miles of the city limits. Wichita is so big, you can live in 7 different surrounding counties and still be to the city limits of Wichita within that 30 minutes. So it's not a good comparison to compare us to Wichita. Us in Wyandotte County are the only comparable cities that have a geographic restriction. Competitiveness. I know that Councilman Padilla said at the last meeting that police agencies nationwide are having a difficulty recruiting, and he's exactly right. This is a nationwide problem, and that's why we need to be competitive. Right now, there are officers who live just outside of Shawnee County who are driving to Lawrence, who are driving to Overland Park, who are driving to those other surrounding cities that we compete with, just because they can still live at where they want to live and not move to that county, or to move to that location. So I think that we can pick up a few of those individuals. This isn't going to be something, I don't think we're going to see well, I know we're not going to see a mass exodus of people leaving Shawnee County. I know we're not going to see a mass migration to the city of Topeka if we change this, but if we just get one person a year, that's beneficial for us. That gives us an opportunity to bring somebody to the city of Topeka who may not otherwise move here. We talked about the sales tax tonight, about how the sales tax is down. This gives us an opportunity to, maybe that person who's living in Grantville and driving to Lawrence now, maybe they would consider coming to Topeka, and now they can buy their gas and their groceries and generate some tax revenue, sales tax revenue for us here in the city of Topeka. So we talk about vested interest. That's one of the things that we hear, that if we don't live in the city of Topeka, if we don't live in Shawnee County, that we won't have a vested interest in our community. I know that I used to work with Councilwoman Hiller when I was a community officer in District 1. I've never lived in District 1. I didn't live in District 1 at that time, but I think she would say that I had a vested interest in her district. I don't live in the city of Topeka. I live in Shawnee County, but I still have a vested interest in the city of Topeka because this is where I work. This is the community that I serve. This is the community that pays me. I definitely have a vested interest. I know of one officer who literally lives on the county line. If he lived one house over, he would be outside of Shawnee County. Now, if he moved one house over, are we going to say that he doesn't have the same vested interest that he has now? Absolutely not. We would not say that. He still has a vested interest in his community just because of where he lives there. So, again, I just want to ask for your support in doing away with this, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. I'll open up comments and just restate again, very briefly, that to me, this is a duty of care, duty of loyalty. We're not employees in the city of Topeka, to me, personally, and this is just my personal opinion. It's a thing of pride. I mean, when you subscribe to this community and you're working for this community and you love this community, you want to live where you serve. And it's again, a cyclical thing. It's almost like being a public servant. I think that our citizens want to know and interact and be around the people that are serving them in their community. It was something that our constituency, when we were in the process of hiring City Manager Trout, it was one of our biggest concerns, wanting to make sure that our city manager was living within the city. It was one of the primary concerns that our citizens had. So again, this is something very important. I'm not going to be supporting removing this measure. Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to start, but I'll try. My throat's hurting. Doug, I want to thank you. Thank you for being honest when you applied and said, I can't move to the city. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that honesty, and I appreciate you following the rules. Because there was a point in time where we all wanted to consider you, but we knew we couldn't. So I just want to say thank you. You know, I guess for me, and I've received a lot of emails. When I took this job 15 years ago, I had to live in District 3. I had to live there. I might want to go live next door to Antonio, but I can't do it. I have to stay in District 3. I knew that when I applied for this position, just like all the department heads know when they, or whoever, city employees, let me just say that, they know when they apply for those positions what it entails. This is like the second time they've come back to the council and said, oh, can we change that? Oh, I can't, sell my house or blah, blah, blah. You knew that when you took that. If we have people that are not following the rules, shame on them. Shame on them. If we have people that, and it bothers me to hear that, some people that I really, really care for, but it bothers me, and now we want to twist it and say, well, let's just not do that. I know our last discussion, I had people call me and say, they blamed on the city manager for bringing this forward. And say he just doesn't want to live here. He wants to live somewhere else. And I had to say, no, I don't think that's it. And they reminded me that they want him and other people to stay there. I'll be glad when this one vote is over, I really will. Because constituents that are paying our salary, they want us to stay in Topeka. When they talk about it doesn't grow. You know, they talk about nationwide, everybody is having this problem with the police officers. It's not the residency that's why they don't want to work for the police department. It's what's going on nationwide. That's what I got out of that. It's nationwide. We're having a hard time filling those positions. I'm sorry. I just want to sum it up, if I may, Madam Mayor. You know, I read a lot of emails, but this is the one I like the best. It says, I live in the 6th district, but my husband and I own property in 1, 2, 3, 5, and 9. I'm writing you about the proposed resolution to remove the Shawnee County residency requirement for employment by the city. I'm opposed to this and do not feel you should vote for it. Many qualified people live or are willing to move to Shawnee County. I want city employees to reside in the county, city of Topeka, so they can enjoy the same pleasures and tribulations that I experience. I want them to have ownership in their position and to be or become very familiar with the city and its neighborhoods. The same ownership is not experienced when someone gets to leave the county and head home. If this resolution passes, the city is encouraging staff to live outside the county and for them to take and spend their salaries, which I pay for, outside the county. This does not benefit and promote Topeka. You as council members make decisions for our city and are required to live in your districts. These city employees also make decisions for our city and should have similar requirements. And for those reasons and those reasons alone, I will not support this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Clear. A couple of things. You had mentioned, like, if you love the community, you'll want to live there. Well, when I worked at Osage, I love that community. I go down to the football games, I go to the parades, but I did not want to live there. My kids were in school here. We had been in our house for 20 years. I didn't want to live there. Occasionally I bought gas down there, but most of the time on the weekends, I did my shopping, I did everything here. I think one of the smartest things I've heard said is what Councilmember Mays said last week was, it goes both ways. We have people that live here that work elsewhere. And so it's not like we have no tax money because everybody that, you know, that doesn't work here, doesn't live here, but I thought that was a really good point. I don't feel like I'm knowledgeable enough to tell HR who and how to hire. I think that's that's their job. I think there's some specialty positions that we can't fill here. And everybody keeps saying, there's people here, there's people here, there's people here, but they're not applying. Okay, so they're here. But if they don't apply, how are we gonna hire them? And if they don't apply, it's because they don't want to move here. Well, I'm sorry I can't go to Topeka because I gotta live there, so then we don't get those people either. I don't want to put one more roadblock in front of the police department. You're right, it's hard to be a policeman. Let's add one more block. Now you have to live in Topeka, you know, and I think it's gonna make that harder. Well, I know it's gonna make it harder for them. My constituents, it was about 50-50. When I researched this, that's what I found. 50% of the cities had residency, 50 didn't, 50 liked it, 50, I mean, it's a hard decision. There's very good reasons why you should have a requirement, there's very good reasons why you shouldn't, and it is a difficult decision. But I think my constituents were like, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. I don't have to make that decision because it is difficult. I will support this because as a person who worked out of town, my daughter lives here, works out of town, I don't think it's going to have that impact. I think we'll just get more people. And the one thing that sticks out with me is when people say, hire the people here. Yep, love to. If you just apply, we would love to do that. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. Like most tough questions, I reached out to my infamous feedback team, sent 400 and some odd emails out, and the majority of my constituents do not support changing it. And so in this case, I will honor their wishes.
Okay, so is there a motion? Councilwoman Heller.
I wanted to comment as well. I chaired the committee. I reported briefly before that I think when the three of us went into it, we had one in favor, one against, and me on the fence. And it was really fascinating to do the deep dive and see what we came up with. And you've had our report, so I won't repeat that. But personally, we did vote in favor of it 3-0 to send it forward based on the testimony and the research that we did. So just to lay that groundwork. Since then, as I've sort of lived with thinking about it and had the feedback pro and con, my thoughts have advanced even further. I think Mrs. Cook may have, in her way, said it's an anachronism at this point. It comes from the day when you had to live where you worked, and if you joined the Civic Club, you had to come every week for lunch or you got kicked out. It just was a different lifestyle and a different time. We are at a point now where we have really picked our head up as a city. We're doing some great things with our downtown, with our community, with our neighborhoods. We did not discover, when the committee did the work, that that offering choice meant that everybody moved out of town or that nobody came to town. And so for me, I began to step back and go, well, what are we doing? And what is that employee, whether they already live here or went to Washburn and are graduating and want to decide where they're going to go, or that they've applied from wherever, be it Osage County or Oklahoma or the West Coast, what are they thinking when they would apply? Because we want to grow our city. Well, we can be part of that too, bringing people in. What happens? Well, if giving people choice doesn't mean that it results in most people living in the city anyway, okay, that's not a problem. Okay, what else is it we want to do? What do people think? What I realized, and when I got the most recent input, it was 50-50 for and against, but they used the same reason. They ought to live here because we want this to be a nice city and we want it to be a great place to live. The other 50% was, if you were applying for that job or you were a young person and your family you're considering staying in town and somebody said to you, you have to live here, what impression does that make on them? And what I realized that the impression that makes on me is these people think so little of their community that they have to make you live there or else they think you won't. And that's horrible with what we're trying to do. That's kind of how it settled in on me. And then we ended up in the committee process talking about our hiring practices. Particularly for me, diversity is really important. And the staff has been saying that that's something they're still struggling with, and we're implementing some new strategies. Our HR department was still just posting things on the web. And you don't change anything if you don't change practices. So if we needed to do more to up our game in terms of how we recruit and who we recruit, we want to do that. Part of the testimony we got in terms of examples of people we've lost were folks that were from Fort Riley soldiers, recruiting from Fort Riley, where you had a 2-soldier family. One soldier was getting out, the other soldier was still in. They had a family there in Junction City or Ogden or Manhattan or something like that. And so we couldn't recruit that professional person to Topeka during that transition period for their family. Another example was recruiting Native Americans who were in Haskell or were graduates from Haskell who had settled in that community and wanted to stay. We also have lots of Native Americans who live on the res, but work in town. So is it impossible? I don't know. If what we need to do, and we're already doing that as a community, is figure out how to attract employees, how to reach out and engage them. We've really been unhappy, many, that some of the companies that we have subsidized otherwise weren't really, with our economic development money, weren't working very hard to recruit people to Topeka, or in fact told the realtors to have people live in Lawrence. Well, with that policy here, we haven't had an affirmative recruitment program either. And at this point, it's gearing up through JADO and otherwise, but we too should be telling people what our neighborhoods are and encouraging, and what our amenities are, and encouraging them to come here so they want to come here and live here as well as work for us, I would argue. And we are also really working on having quality of place because we wanted to attract and keep our professionals of all ages. And I think we're really on a good trajectory for that, and we're ready to go 100% for people to choose to live here rather than running them off by making a bad impression and saying you have to because we don't think you'll live here if we don't make you. So I'm going to vote yes.
Councilman Mays?
Thank you, Mayor. So I just kind of want to tell a story real quick. I was in Omaha a few weeks ago with my family. We were visiting some other family, and at the hotel, when I was checking in, I gave my driver's license. She said, "Oh, you're from Topeka. I'm from Topeka too." And I said, "Well, you should move back." Without me telling her I was on the city council or anything. And the first thing she said is, "Oh, I have a 1-year-old, and I'm never moving back to Topeka until they get their crime problem fixed." We've got a negative perception from people that come from here, from people that have never been here at all. We had a Washburn football player that made national media when he got murdered in Topeka. I had somebody call me last week complaining about the response time when they called 911. We have a police officer shortage. We have a fire department that needs more staffing. There are qualified people in Topeka, but they're not applying for those jobs. And there are people that may want that job, but they don't know how great our community is. And when they see on that application that they won't get that job if they don't move to Topeka, they run away. And they go to Olathe, and they go to Overland Park and Lawrence and all these other places that will take their application. And for me, this boils down to public safety. We have an outcry for better law enforcement, and our law enforcement does a great job, but they don't have enough people. And they need more people. And if those people live outside of the city, perhaps if they get a job here and they come here on a daily basis, 5 days a week, then maybe they'll see what a great community we have, and they'll want to move here, and they'll move their kids here, and they'll set their roots in our school system, and they'll stay here. So I'm going to support this. I do feel a little bit differently about the department heads. I feel like if you're getting a job for $100,000 a year, that's worth moving here. But for an entry-level police officer or fireman, I think we need to open this up for those types of jobs. Thank you.
Councilman Padilla.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to thank the committee for the work that they did in, as Councilwoman Hiller likes to say, do the deep dive on the issue. But I don't know that diving deep is the solution. There are a lot of things that we have taken into consideration in pros and cons. Councilwoman Hiller, I would beg to differ that when we ask somebody to move to Shawnee County, that we're ashamed of ourselves and won't feel good enough about ourselves that we have to force somebody to move to Shawnee County. I think that sends the wrong message. And by and large, I think the message that is being sent about Topeka is being sent by our own population. Too many of us speak negatively about the city of Topeka. When asked about our roads, we can't say that we're doing a better job than we have in the past. We have to still complain that we're not doing a good enough job. When we see any other thing that happens in Topeka, we don't blame ourselves maybe for not supporting the efforts that are going on in this town. We blame the city. The city is responsible for certain things, but the rest of the population that lives here in Shawnee County and the city of Topeka is responsible just as much. They have to support the things that we're trying to do. They need to talk positively about the things we're doing so that people will see that Shawnee County, and I say Shawnee County because people keep going back to, we're forcing them to live in the city of Topeka. That's not the case. We're talking about Shawnee County, and I think that's generous to allow people to live in Shawnee County and still work for the city of Topeka. We talk badly about code enforcement in the housing that we have here. But code enforcement is stepping up their game and has for some time and is doing an excellent job. But do we applaud that effort? No. We continue to criticize it. And the citizens voted all of us here from our districts to represent the whole and better good of the city, not just each individual district. And when we talk about the emails that we've received, the messages that we have received, I really have to look at that seriously, because when we say, and I hear them say, we elected you to represent us, and they are right. They didn't elect me to come here and just voice my own opinion and vote on my opinion. It has to be given in balance to what I think the community at large wants for this city of Topeka. They need growth. We set a goal that we were going to grow our population by, in 2018 and 19, by 1,000 people. Allowing people to come to work for the city but not live in the county that it serves doesn't meet that goal, and it seems counterproductive to do that. I really think that we have our own image problem that is keeping us from attracting good people. We have our own image problem that are keeping good qualified people in Topeka for applying city of Topeka jobs. Why? Because when something goes wrong, who gets the bat? The city of Topeka employees. They carry the shoulder the blame for all the ills of the city. And that's not right. I think we have to support what they do, and I think we have to support our city in every way we can. And that means quit running to the greener pastures that don't exist. Green pastures are here in Topeka. Momentum 2022 and everybody else is doing a great job. Our private investors in this town are doing a great job of making this an attractive place to live. We're not forcing anybody to come here. I've heard that term used a number of times. I should have the right to choose where I live. You do. Nobody's making you not take that job. That's your choice. We all have that choice. And to blame the city for making you run away from that job just because we have a residency requirement, I think is putting too much on someone else when it's really your decision to choose whether or not you work in this county and for this city. The county exists because of the city. County commissioners may not like that, but that's true. If it were not for the city, the county would not have a lot of the benefits that they enjoy. And the city cannot continue to suffer the loss of population or support from its own population. It needs to quit criticizing itself. It needs to work as hard as it can to make this the place of choice when you want to get a job. You should be proud. At one time, I remember, it was a badge of honor to be able to say I work for the city of Topeka. And now I think people kind of get cast aside as a under par employee. Councilwoman Ortiz mentioned an email she got. I got the same one, and I was impressed by it. I got another one that really made an impression on me, and I'll quote, "We are not hiring the best candidates available, but rather we are settling on less favorable folks just on the premise that they live in Shawnee County." So that person is saying, just because you live in Shawnee County, we're settling for somebody that's less than qualified, that's less capable. Why would you say that about the county that you live in? I mean, why would you say that this is a terrible place when you choose to live here? We have got to quit doing that to ourselves. And so I won't announce, but I think you know how I'm going to vote. Thank you.
Okay, at this point in time, unless there's any, Councilman Emerson.
First of all, I think Mr. Padilla is on the fence, is my guess. But, and I hate to follow him up in a impassioned speech, and I'm always amazed at your depth of knowledge and your love for this community. You know, I was, as Councilwoman Hiller talked about, I was the one on the committee who started out as an absolute no on this for a lot of the reasons that have been espoused tonight. I somewhat reluctantly supported it out of committee, and that support was based on extensive testimony by the police who were trying to recruit and the fire. And during that whole process, I heard not one word from anyone in my district or the city for that matter that I can recall. However, I can tell you the last week and a half, and you guys probably all know the same, I'm sure it's been the same, I have gotten probably 150 emails, phone messages, texts, and aside people that work for the city, they have been uniformly, don't do this, don't relax this. So this has been, I mean, I'm trying to think of a word I can use here on TV. This stinks because there's people I really like and deeply respect, and I want to give them the freedom to do what they want. On the other hand, how do you vote against what your constituents are telling you when they're speaking their mind? And to get 150 people of my constituents in my district to email me or talk to me is a lot. So I wish there was another way we could achieve this. If there was a way to resolve our recruiting problems and stuff, I mean, I wish there was some, as the city manager alluded earlier, I've been talking to him the last 3 or 4 weeks and with legal. Is there something we can do? Is there a way to do a pay differential? Is there a way to do some sort of hiring preference? And uniformly what I've heard is no. I think something like that would tip the scales with my constituents if there was, because at least, as Mr. Ledbetter said earlier, at least there's a concession. If you're not going to live here, at least you're giving up something. You know, it's not maybe a perfect bargain, but at least there's an incentive, therefore, to live here. And I guess I'll just ask Mr. Trout one more time, if you don't mind. Is there anything like that we can do?
Based on our research, as I mentioned earlier, the only one that we're looking at is the idea of once you reach a supervisory level, which we established as grade 7, as our discussion, that level then requires someone that is moving into that position to have a requirement to move to the community if they weren't already a member of the, a resident of Shawnee County.
Thank you, Mr. Trout. And Mayor, if I may ask one other question. Oh, okay, I guess. Mrs. Robertson, and I apologize, I didn't prep you for this. But when I was looking through the contracts a couple weeks ago, as a lot of you probably know, we're going through police, fire, water contracts right now. I guess police are done at this point, but there was a thing in there. I thought it said on all of them, if we change the residence requirements, all the contracts get reopened. Is that correct?
Councilmember Emerson and City Manager, I'm going to lob this one out to HR or Catherine, whichever one.
Yeah, and I apologize for that.
That's okay. That's all right. They work with those every day, and I
don't have my notes right in front of me, Councilmember Emerson, but water and fire do have some type of language that says if you amend or revise or repeal your residency requirement, then theirs will automatically follow. Thank you. Teamsters and WPC and a third one don't say anything. So their contractual language would continue regardless of what your vote is here. And FOP and I think it's FOP and one other have automatic reopeners should you make an amendment to the residency requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, having heard from the members of the body at this point in time, do we have a motion? We have a motion for approval by Councilman Cohen and second by Deputy Mayor Clear. At this point in time, we proceed with the voting.
So yes and no.
So if you vote yes, it means that you are repealing and changing effectively the residency requirements in the city of Topeka and Shawnee County by opening those parameters. If you vote no, it means that what you're doing is that you are retaining our current policy of expecting our employees to live within Shawnee County. Councilman Emerson.
Mayor, I'm really sorry, I don't know if this is out of order, but we cannot just target certain unions that are having the recruit, is that correct? It's either all or nothing on this?
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Mays?
Again, I apologize. Thank you, Mayor. Just like Councilman Emerson, I'm sorry to be so late in this process, but I feel like what the city manager mentioned with putting a stipulation that once you reach grade level 7, that you are required to live in the city limits. I think it's worth us at least voting on that piece before this. So if it's in order, I'd like to make an amendment to do that.
So at this point in time, we have an amendment. It doesn't change the initial motion, but it's an amendment to state that anybody who is above level 7 or equivalent in our HR's certification would then be required.
Would have the same rules that we have right now.
Okay.
The same that remain unchanged. So I believe that's Shawnee County currently.
Shawnee County. Do we have a second so that we can have discussion? We have a second to the amendment. Deputy Mayor Clear.
Okay. City manager, what is a level 7? Who's that going to affect? And do you see any problem with this?
Well,
and you discussed it.
Yes, really level 7 is the initial grade where most individuals get to a management position level.
So how's that work for TPD and TFD?
I think that's a sergeant, or it's a lieutenant level at the police department level. So that gives you an indication. It's our management analysts, others, trying to remember my list. But at the police department, it's a lieutenant. Is it workable? I think it's an option that can be considered and managed related to this as a solution, as a possibility. I think that we can manage it not unlike what we do right now, where they have to move to the community when they're hired. They would know that if they apply and are accepted and hired for that position, what the requirement is related to moving to the community within 6 months of that establishment of that higher level position.
But we have that now. Within 6 months, you have to move to Topeka when you're
After
hired.
6 months after completing probation, you must move to the community.
So I don't know how's that help?
And by choosing a grade, that helps us, given our pay plan that we have. It would provide us a specific cut point related to positions, and so it would be known by anyone that if they're going to that grade or that type of position, that they would have that requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you. I think what we're saying is we're going to use this rule for some, but not the others, and I think that's very unfair. I think that's very, very unfair. I won't support this. Either we're going to do it for all or we're not going to do it. But I cannot go along with saying, oh, yeah, but by the time you make that big money, you got to stay. Every city employee to me is important, from the lowest paid to the highest paid, because we all have to work together. We all, and that's what it takes. So to start picking and choosing, this is terrible. I won't support that.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I'm curious, you know, if we're going to give something, then, you know, in the contract negotiations with the unions, we would expect something in return. How would we leverage this to get something in return?
Well, as was mentioned, each of the contracts have a reopening clause. So we would go back through the process related to the contract and provide that as a opportunity for them to be included in the contract and do negotiations related to that.
So would we need to state the motion then slightly differently so that it only applies if we receive something in return? Because otherwise it's just the current policy, and I'm not understanding how we would have that as leverage.
Well, I think that would be some guidance that we would receive from you prior to beginning those negotiations. We do that as a course of base whenever we're talking to you. When we're beginning negotiation phase, we come to you and seek authorization related to the negotiation process. So we would receive feedback, present options that we would consider as we enter into those negotiations.
So then, correct me if I'm wrong, that would require us to approve this specific amendment for each and every bargaining unit individually,
Right.
because if they choose not to give us anything in return for this.
It's an amendment to the contract, and so yes, it has to come back before you for approval.
Right, so if we just do a blanket motion now, then we have no bargaining power because it's the city policy.
All it does is it states that, and then it has to be negotiated. So if it could not come to an agreement related to what it would exchange, do you have any additional?
And please correct me if I'm way off balance, but it seems like we're giving a freebie here away without receiving anything in return.
You want this back?
Councilmember Jensen, for the three unions that do not have a reopener language or we will change with you language, their contract would be the same.
Right.
And they would have the residency requirement until their current contract term ends.
Correct.
I am hesitant to say that, I mean, there's a term of art, good faith bargaining under PURA, and you can't have just a hard and fast directive when you go into negotiations.
Agreed.
You have to bargain in good faith. So that has to be the umbrella under anything you choose to do.
So this would not automatically give something away. They would have, if they're in a bargaining unit, they would have to bargain to get this additional amenity, if you will.
Fire and water have language in their contract that whatever you do here automatically applies to them.
So we would not get anything in return for this then?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor Clear.
One word, we get people. We get hirees.
Councilmember Padilla?
I have a question, Mary. Firstly, lieutenants aren't covered by the contract, correct?
That's right.
Correct.
Yes.
So at level 7, they're not covered by the contract that would dictate they would have to move into the county.
That is correct.
They would have to already.
Okay. The other question I have is, and I see for me a little bit of problem because I think that would be a detriment to qualified sergeants or detectives within the agency who would like to seek promotion within the agency and move upwards in advancement. If they saw that as a consideration for them to get promoted, they would have to have an additional requirement on them. And I kind of agree with, I do agree with Councilwoman Ortiz. I think if we're going to apply this, we have to apply it across the board. And I just don't see that there's an advantage there, whether we get something back or not, because in a way, you'd have to do that with the contract for patrolmen up to sergeants, right? Because that would be where that would take effect if they wanted to promote.
Councilmember Padilla, I think you're pretty much spot on. It'd be another hurdle.
Yeah.
to the promotion process.
Okay.
Mayor, can,
Yes.
thank you. I would like to have Jackie come forward and actually list, she has the pay plan brought up, so we can actually state exactly what are level 7 positions. If you could, please.
Good evening. So the level 7 is the start of those supervisory professional positions. So level 7 includes positions such as our city forester, our probation supervisor, the city clerk. And then when you go up from there, positions included our zoo operations manager, our payroll managers are in level 8, municipal court clerk, that's the clerk of the court. Higher levels, all of our engineering positions start in levels 9, 10, and above. Our division director positions, and then into our department director positions when you get up into 12 and above. So it would be most of the entry-level supervisory positions, all of our section managers, division directors, and department directors that would be impacted by a residency requirement if it were at level 7 and above. One of the things that Catherine touched on that I would want to just reiterate, that it would create a challenge with trying to do internal promotions from bargaining unit positions into management, because that would add a additional restriction over non-bargaining unit positions. Another thing that it does do is most of the hard-to-fill positions that we've had in recruitment, for some of them over a year and a half, are engineering positions, and it would further restrict all of those engineering positions over other positions within the city. So I do think it's important for you all to know that as well.
Councilman Mays.
Okay, so I guess the purpose of this is I think, for one, to at least show that we've thought about other options. You know, I think that's a big piece of this motion that I made, but also what I mentioned earlier in my comments is that for me, the residency requirement is about recruitment. I mean, again, I think it's for me, police and fire, and it's about recruiting and filling vacancies. It's not about promotions for me. And I feel like if somebody wants to have a management level opportunity in our city, then you know, that's when perhaps they need to be invested in our community. And so I get that there are probably, if we open this up, there probably will be people that are qualified for promotions that don't live in Shawnee County and will no longer be eligible. But I know that typically people that are up for promotions usually have competition. There are usually, and when we talk about there are qualified people to work in Shawnee County, or to work in Topeka, we're saying that about the entry-level positions now. We definitely have people that live here that are qualified for those promotions, for those executive level positions as well. But it's the entry level positions that we're having a hard time filling. And so I'll support this amendment. Of course, I made the motion, so why wouldn't I? But I would encourage you guys to consider it as well. Thanks.
Councilman Jensen.
Final comment. For what it's worth, I also asked my feedback team about this specific idea and did not receive support.
Thank you. Okay, so we proceed with Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. It's hard to imagine going back, for one thing. I think you end up setting yourself up as the farm team, because people could live wherever they wanted, and then if they wanted a management position, they'd have to move, so they'd choose to go work for the highway patrol or somebody, commute rather than give up their home. I think it's backwards. I mean, personally, if we're going to do it, what our goal has been is we want everybody to live in the city, not in the county as far as that goes, and we want the construction of those high-dollar homes to happen inside the city limits, and the resulting tax revenue, all that kind of stuff. We've wanted to see within the city limits. We've prioritized in our land use plan.
I'm going to state that that's what I'm doing.
if we were going, if we were going to do something like that, seems that we should pull it all the way back into the city. I just do think it's just so complex, and it would cause, I mean, we've talked about it for 10 minutes, I guess, but I just see it causing more problems and disincentive to become a career Topeka employee, which is a shame, because we would be allowing people elsewhere. If I may, Mayor, we didn't mention this earlier, and I don't want to clutter up the vote, but we actually looked at this ordinance and this change from much more of a personnel perspective when this came forward. It's not simply dropping the residency requirement altogether. Actually, with the police department, they said they were willing to take it a step at a time, and if you look at this 1.5 page document, maybe we should even have the clerk read it, but individuals employed in a public safety position as defined by the HR director still have the 6 months from initial employment period, must reside at a location no more than 30 minutes from travel time. So anybody that from their assigned reporting station or office. So this actually does take some steps, and the management and employees that were advocating for the change were agreeable to say somebody would have to be defined in their job description as any emergency public safety position, however that would be done. And we also left we put language in that not only gave HR permission, but directed them to look at the job descriptions, and that if there were a reason to live close by that was job related, that could be written into the job description. It just wouldn't be blanket. So there was a performance and job related element to what came forward. It wasn't just blanket either. And when I've talked to people, not a lot of people realized those qualifiers that were in there.
Thank you, Councilwoman Heller. City Manager, we have a request from Councilmember Padilla, if you would be amenable.
Yes. City Manager, there have been a couple of points brought up, and I appreciate what Councilman Mays said with regards to entry level and recruitment as being some of his review of the need here. And I speak regularly with the Chief of Police and get encouraged by the innovation that they have shown in meeting this challenge outside of making any requirement changes for residency. Mm-hmm. If I may, I'd like to call the chief to speak to that.
Sure. Chief Cochran?
I'll get a speeding ticket on the way home.
15 too slow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
15.
So what specifically was
okay. So Chief, I've been fortunate enough to visit with you on a pretty regular basis, and some of your recruiting team that are actually doing the groundwork and the footwork to address this issue of difficulty in attracting qualified candidates to the City of Topeka Police Department. I know from what they've been telling me that you've been successful because of doing things outside of posting a job application in the newspaper or putting it on the web or going to just the recruitment fairs, that to this point, you've been able to meet enough goals so that you're confident, failing any hiring freeze or anything like that, that you'll be able to recruit enough officers to your agency to meet your need. Can you tell me an idea about the success that you have had?
Yeah, we're very confident that with our recruiting efforts that we'll be able to get full staff by our academy in October. And that is done, will be possible because of the recruiting efforts that we've done. We recruit locally all the time, constantly, but we've also extended those boundaries out. And part of that is sending recruiting teams out to different locations Like I said, we've been to Southern Mississippi, we've been to Lincoln College in Missouri, Haskell Indian College, and then Washburn University is the primary recruiting ground. And so when we talk about recruitment, we've totally changed the paradigm at the Topeka Police Department, because we no longer get people walking in the front door saying, hey, I want to be a police officer. There's qualified people out there. You just got to go find them. You got to find a way to find them. And so, we have been successful. And in our recruiting efforts, it's a little bit different in the aspect that we do lose some people because of a residency, but we do recruit more people than we lose in that aspect. And again, some of those things that we're working on make that possible. I think one of the important things is, though, when we talk about a residency issue, it's not a law enforcement and fire department issue. It's a citywide issue. And we're talking about those jobs that, that can be, we employ somebody who lives in a neighboring town like Osage, Holton, or whatever, that's nice and close, and again, they have those family ties to those areas, and they don't want to give up those things. I'm very confident that most people that we hire are going to move to the county or into the city. I'm very confident in that. But again, with our recruiting efforts, when we go outside of Shawnee County, we're recruiting basically far enough away that they're going to move here, if that makes sense. So our recruiting efforts are really different. The important thing, though, about our recruiting efforts is this isn't something that these relationships that we've established with these universities and these communities like Fort Riley, McConnell, and Leavenworth aren't partnerships that were developed overnight. These were things that we worked very hard on. And so as we roll forward, we're getting into that ground where things that we get established, if we go into a hiring freeze and we go into things like that, are really going to jeopardize those efforts. And when we go out recruiting, we don't just recruit for the police department. We also take somebody from Forge with us, and we're recruiting their families. We're recruiting their spouse, their significant other. So when they move here as a Topeka police officer, their spouse or significant other should have a job lined up so when they hit here. So we're recruiting the whole. It's not just, the police officer. And a lot of those innovative things can be done in other departments. But we've worked very diligently with HR. Jackie Russell's been tremendous to work with in this process and been very, very supportive because she's seen the innovation, seen the work that we've put into it, and the city manager's been very supportive of it. So those efforts are there, and it can work. But I do think that when we have a residency requirement, we do limit, I think we limit other agencies more than we're limiting the police department or the fire department, personally, because our recruiting efforts are different. And the fire department's coming on board with some of their aspects too. And so, again, when we're recruiting those type of positions, we're pretty confident most people are going to move into the county or the city limits. But the residency is really more effective, I think has more impact on some of my fellow department heads.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, so at hand we have a motion to make an amendment. Yes, Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I can count those as I'm going to withdraw my motion if it's all right with my second.
Okay. Who seconded? Would you remove your second, Councilwoman Clear? He has removed his motion.
Yes.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. At this point in time, we have the vote in front of us. A vote for yes would remove the boundaries for the city of Topeka. A vote for no would keep things as they have been. We proceed by voting. And with this vote comes a break.
Okay. Motion fails. We have 5 yes and 5 no. So we have Hiller, Clear, Mays, Cohen, and Lesser voting yes.
City Manager?
thank you, governing body, for having made a decision on this. I know this has been one that we've wrestled with, and we've brought both positions forward. But I want to make sure to ensure you that now that the decision's made, I will move forward with the process necessary for those individuals that have been waiting to have this decision made in order to be able to inform them of their requirement to move to the community if they haven't done so already. And so we'll begin that process, working with HR to make sure that we're making sure that employees are following the requirements of our residency requirement. Okay?
Thank you very much. We now have a 10-minute break. I will see the council back. There's no executive sessions, and we just have 2 items, so.
Hey, Lisa, can I ask you